We'll move on to the Smith-Freeland annexation.
In the North Shore Neighborhood Plan area. Wow. Yeah. And this is a vicinity map that shows the red outlined parcels, or the parcels that are proposed to be annexed. So there are 4 parcels. One of them is 2 connected, so it's actually 3 areas that are being proposed to be annexed. The property owner and developer has been working with these property owners for a while, and they have finally come to an agreement. So these parcels will be brought in to the North Shore neighborhood. Maybe. There. So the request is to annex 4 parcels, and the total is approximately 55.18 acres. And you are the approval authority for annexations, as you know. The Planning Commission has a fairly minor role with annexations, and they, at their last meeting, reviewed the concept plan and commented. And that's basically the limits of their review. In addition to annexation, they are requesting zoning to be applied to the parcels. So this is what is called the mega plan. So this is the North Shore plan. There's a slightly updated version, but this one is easier to read because it has lots of colors and has the parcels outlined. So the parcels are going counterclockwise from the right. They are I think it's A, B, and C. And the intent for the A parcel, which is owned currently by the Smiths, is additional townhome units, front-loaded and rear-loaded, and then right-of-way for future transit corridor. Parcel B is owned by the Freelands, and that little white square and the bigger white square is actually the Freelands property. That's their home, and they wish to remain there. So what's being proposed is the MR zone on most of the property, but the piece that they are holding on to, they're requesting RR, or rural residential. And we've been talking about that, and there will be a minor subdivision that'll be required in order to create that parcel, but it will be brought into Saratoga Springs. And then parcel C is actually 2 parcels put together, again owned by the Smiths, and there's a potential future church site, front-loaded and rear-loaded townhomes, and approximately 23 acres of an area lot called Lot 3 that's being proposed for commercial uses. And the applicant is requesting that this area be zoned mixed residential and that the neighborhood commercial uses be placed in this location. And when we get into talking about some of the terms of the development agreement, we'll talk about that more. And the Planning Commission certainly had some comments on that. So the Planning Commission, as I mentioned, reviewed the concept plan at their meeting on February 28th. And the majority of their input revolved around that Lot 3. And a couple of them felt that the commercial parcels should be maintained and never be able to be, or not be able to be converted back to residential, that it needs to remain commercial. And then there's just some back and forth about infrastructure costs to the city. And I explained that it's basically just an extension of North Shore. They will be bringing in an amended neighborhood plan after the property is annexed. Actually, they've already made application for that, but we will process it after the property is actually in the city limits. And then there was mention by one of the planning commissioners to consider the zoning of parcel, it's actually parcel 3 and parcel C, as regional commercial when it's annexed and not mixed residential. So this is a work session only, and we will be scheduling a public hearing in the future. And as I mentioned, once the property is annexed, an amended neighborhood plan will be considered. I included in the packet a copy of the draft annexation agreement, which is just that, it's draft. And Kevin, the city attorney, has reviewed it and made some comments. I've made some comments on it, but I think the biggest point of discussion about that, I mean, there's some things that need to be cleaned up and kind of to be expected, but probably the point of discussion is really that lot 3. And the annexation agreement currently says that D.R. Horton will look for a commercial developer for that property because they're not commercial developers. So they'd be looking to sell it off for somebody else to develop. And they want to have a clause that says after marketing it actively for 2 years, if they don't have an interested commercial buyer, that they would like that to revert to townhomes, basically, into the same kind of residential property. So that's something that you'll want to discuss. As Chriselle with D.R. Horton will explain, the timeline doesn't start until that plat that creates that parcel moves forward to create the parcel, and that's quite a ways down the line. It's in a later phase than what they're working on. They're working on the southern portion. So it's actually a number of years away before, well, certainly a year before they are platting that, and that's when the clock would start ticking. So this is a work session. I think that Chriselle from D.R. Horton is here, and she'll come up and kind of explain to you what they are proposing, and then we'd like to hear back from you.
So if she introduced me, do I have to? No. So we're grateful to be at this point finally, and forgive me for the on and off. I can't see my paper, but I can't see you. So we'll do our best. But I was glad that Nora pointed out on the commercial that it is from the recordation of a plat, so that starts that 2-year time frame. We've tried to do our best to give as much hope to that general commercial area that you guys recognize in your plan. We want to be partners with the city and recognize that there is a desire for that. We've been working with David Johnson to make connections and find people and users. There's lots of people that would love to market it for us, but we're still not seeing any actual people and users, but we've got time. So we'll continue to do that. And the reverter is that if after that 2-year period we haven't been successful in selling it to someone else, and we're offering a super pad, it's not undeveloped, we're gonna bring in all the utilities, it'll be ready to go as soon as that plat is recorded and that sale could be consummated, then they could start building. And our hope with this zoning is that, you know, all they have to do is come in with a site plan. It should be quick and we can get people and boots on the ground. So that's kind of our thoughts on that. We're interested to hear your thoughts as well and here to answer any questions. But if it did revert back to residential, the 195 units doesn't increase our density any. We're still at 8.5 and it stays the same regardless of whether there's houses there or not. So there you go. Thanks.
Okay. Councilman McComber.
So first off, I still want to give a little attention to A and B, or 1 and 2. I like that there's consistency, that you didn't do something different or with more density or whatever with the new land, but kept it consistent. And that's really the purpose of this, is you've gone in to create continuity so that the neighborhood has that, versus sometimes when you have a lot of little developments come in, it can feel very piecemeal, and it's usually not very well planned. If you look at older cities, it's very convoluted, very difficult to get through a city that grew over 100 years. We have a little advantage that we've grown over 20. And then also, just for those in the audience, the big road there, and then sort of how it has like green space up above, it's a future major transit corridor that D.R. Horton has preserved for potential light rail or BRT or something along those lines. And that's why we're putting higher density next to a light rail. You're not going to want to build a half-acre home on a light rail line. And so I just appreciate that. And then really, I have no problem with the rural residential maintenance on that home. I appreciate their willingness to create more continuity. And then at any time when they decide to sell or move, when they don't want to have all those neighbors anymore, I have no problem. Then if I'm on the council, they can bring obviously another request to change that and create continuity across that piece as well. And so now as I get into C, I actually think that it's sort of fair what you're asking. I went and drove Pioneer Crossing quite a bit. I drive it a lot, but I don't really pay attention as much. And really the only commercial or any kind of commercial is right on the corner. And I don't know if it really will. I don't really know if you're going to get the business, but I appreciate you giving the time, at least 2 years to try. I don't think there's a demand. We're having a hard enough time, even in our regional centers, getting businesses in and neighborhood commercial in, let alone this spot. So I really appreciate your willingness, again, I'm just one here, to give it at least 2 years, and really it's about 3. By the time you get here, you guys go fast, but not that fast. And so really a 3-year window. And if the economy continues to do well, then there might be a little strip mall or something. But even then, I'm only anticipating that you're going to see something on that front, right on Old Saratoga Road. Nothing in the back behind it. And maybe bordering where the gas station or something could go on the corner there that is already in the city. And so I can even see someone coming in and saying, hey, would you be willing to give 100 feet because we need a little bit more of a square, you know, so there's to create a different parcel. So there's lots of things that potentially can happen, but I would be shocked if all of this develops as commercial. And I appreciate your effort, and I have no problem with the reverting, especially the fact that the very key point that you made is that your density does not increase because it now switches over to residential. Yeah, so I think that David, he's not here today, he's not feeling well, he'll help, he'll do whatever he can to be a resource to you. He will help go out there, give him all the sales pitch for the city, and do everything we can to help. But realistically, it's not the best. Really the other side that has the huge, big, long one lends itself more to a commercial development. And even then, that's been marketed for commercial for a long, long time. And it's still just grass and weeds. So that's where I stand on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilman Wilden.
I'll start with A, parcel A, is that what we're calling it? A. It makes a lot of sense there. That's consistent with what we've done everywhere else. It provides, maintaining the corridor for the transit. And that was part of the bigger picture that we couldn't talk about before, but we kind of could, whatever. But it's been kind of in the plan there. Similar on B, consistent with the comments that Councilmember McComber made. Parcel C on the commercial, just a few questions. When you say, maybe I'm not understanding this, when you say the density overall doesn't increase, would that mean you're just trying to maintain the 8
So 8.5 is what it calculates our current plan to. We just barely finalized like the boundaries of, we haven't come up with the boundaries, but the area that we will trade with the city. And so that was affecting our density. But as we've run those numbers, and part of what this agreement locks us into is a density. The density would be 8.5. You see on this plan here, 1659, but that doesn't take into account the units under lot 3. If we had units there, our ultimate acreage and our ultimate density would be 1956 or so. So it's another 195 units on lot 3, but it doesn't change it because our calculations on the net developable area increase and decrease at the same rate.
Well, and I would presume that if it reverts back, hopefully it never does, but if it were to revert back after this was all done, you'd do some like feathering consistent, because it looks like on the, is that the north side?
South, so the south end has
Whatever.
our larger lots.
Well, I'm gonna call it the north side, because I'm looking, you know what I mean.
North is to the left.
south side, sorry.
To the right, yeah.
To the right?
Remember, we can't go top screen
Yep,
north.
no, that's fine. Anyway, it looks like there's a little bit larger homes. There'd be feathering. You wouldn't be bumping up townhomes or condos or whatnot right against those. Did have a question. I mean, Nora mentioned, you know, that it would revert if you don't have an interested buyer. You use a terminology, it was a little bit different. And I realize this becomes a private transaction, but if we're agreeing to something in annexation agreement that it can revert to this, and maybe this is a question for Kevin, what does that look like and how much visibility would the city have into it? Like if you have an interested buyer and you just can't agree on a price after 2 years, does it revert over, or just what type of visibility would the city have into that? Does that make sense?
What do you mean by visibility?
Visibility, not disability.
Transparency.
Transparency.
Because it's a private transaction.
Yeah, we'd have to build in some protections. The language is a little less than.
I think it would make sense to say that it has to be under contract with the buyer. Within the 2 years, it has to be under contract with the buyer for commercial use.
I'm okay with the concept, and I agree with Council Member McComber's comments. But if you make a decision that, hey, we can get a whole lot more money if we put 195 units, but then you do have a financially viable arrangement with someone who would purchase the property to develop it. I'm just expressing my concern a little bit here, and I don't have a solution for it, where I understand what you're saying is a contract, but you could say we can make our profit margin significantly higher on, say, townhomes versus giving it to.
And we understand that concern. Part of the model in D.R. Horton is turning our money as fast as we can. So we're based on IRR. We also have an obligation as a division to return his investment within 24 months. So I need this sale to return my $32 million that I'll invest in the development of those first phases. So it's in our, I mean, I get what you're saying.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because you get your return a lot quicker if you sell commercial versus developing out homes.
So while I think you have a valid concern, we're motivated as well.
Well, that makes sense, because if you start building houses 3 years out, it's still going to take a lot longer time to get your return on equity or debt or whatever.
Say, go ahead and whatever concerns you have, this is the whole point of the work session. Tell us what your concerns are, and if there's a consensus, we'll get to work on the language. Axton and I will work on the language, make sure that we're protecting the city and
Get David
your important flexibility. If that's what the council's direction is.
Yeah, for me, understanding it's a private party transaction, I would want some language in the contract that there is some visibility, that there was some due diligence done. And I know you're motivated on that, but there was some effort done. Does that make sense? Did you get that, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had, Mayor.
Okay. Councilwoman Barch?
Same thing, parcel A, have no problem with it. We've seen it. We were planning on this. It makes sense along the transit corridor. And same thing with parcel B. The Freelands want to keep their house, and they understand what they're getting into. I have no problem with that at all. So that's fine. And then again, that will eventually, I assume, when their kids or grandkids want to sell it, they'll switch over at some point. Or if they get tired of all of the noisy neighbors, however that works.
Well, they negotiated a pretty sweet deal, but.
Okay,
Because
there
this
you
was,
go.
it was a debate. This is their forever home, but, you know.
Well, if I remember, it's a pretty nice house, so.
It is nice.
On the lot 3 and the western portion of the whole 34 acres, I don't have a problem with that. Again, that's been on the plans. We've worked on that. My concern with the lot 3 is I think you're actually setting it up to fail. I don't think you'll ever get a buyer on it because you've got it set it's neighborhood commercial, and that doesn't make any sense. You'll never have 23 acres of neighborhood commercial. It's just not how it's ever done. Doing it as regional commercial, doing it as business park, you may actually get some sellers or some buyers. So for sure, I think it needs to either change to regional commercial or business park or some combination thereof. I think that will be a lot more marketable. I have concerns about the rebounding back because there is not anything in there that would protect us. And we've got, another particular location in the city that has been up for sale for a while or up for release for a while, and they can't find any buyers, but they want like $4 million a square feet. So of course you can't find a buyer. So I have. That was an exaggeration. Oh, absolutely an exaggeration. Yes, yes. Yeah, big exaggeration. Yeah, but nonetheless, there's no security there. I think that we do need. So when North Shore came in, we had area for some light manufacturing, and we lost that. We had some area we planned on some commercial, and we lost that. We needed some commercial on closer to the transit stop, and we don't have any of that. So I think this area where we really have quite a lot of density, and we're planning on that because of the transit and everything else, we've got the road corridor going down as Pioneer Crossing, we need to have some businesses in there. We need to have something that these people don't necessarily have to drive all the way into town, either Saratoga Springs or Lehigh or wherever. There might be some job centers here. So then again, if you're looking at business park and regional commercial, I think that's much more viable at that size of acreage. And again, I have serious concerns with the whole bounce back just because, again, we've got a lot of housing density here. It makes much more sense to make a viable job center and retail center in this area to support all those housing units. Again, so we're not crowding everything up as far as housing. My preference would be to not have that at all. If the rest of the council is amenable to that, then we definitely need to get some good transparency in there and get some specifics in there as to what qualifies as a buyer. So those are all my comments on those.
Okay. Councilman Porter?
Yeah, so A and B, I think we've covered. I don't think there's any issues with those. Parcel C in the commercial, I agree with a lot of what Councilwoman Bartsch said in regards to possibly, setting yourself up to fail or just, I'm uncomfortable with the 2-year bounce back. I would feel more comfortable if it was longer. It's difficult to look at the general plan. This is supposed to be regional commercial along this area, and I understand some of the concerns from Councilman Comer about whether or not it's viable here or not, and I understand your concerns about whether or not it's viable. My concern is that residential developers, they have a hammer, and they see everything's a nail. They see land, and everything turns into houses, or townhomes, or apartments. It's not, I think that we're shortchanging ourselves if we continually are turning the land we've designated on our general plan as commercial and turning it into houses. Because eventually we're going to have a whole lot of houses. We're not going to have enough commercial to service those houses. And, I understand the way the market works, and I'm a big proponent of the free market. And I understand that this pad site may be green, but in other instances, this council has said, well, it's green and we're just going to have to wait until it's ready, rather than saying we're just going to get rid of commercial and put put houses there instead. So I'm, you know, if the rest of the council is gonna support this bounce back, then I would agree we need to have, you know, to Councilman Wilden's point, we need to have some transparency and some, so we can make sure that a good faith effort is made. Because, you know, just giving up on it because somebody wants to develop that land right now the way they want to develop it rather than the way we've planned for it to be developed isn't, you know, a long-term solution for the city as a whole. So that's, you know, I would be comfortable, you know, whether it's regional commercial or community commercial or business park, I'd be comfortable, you know, upzoning it from neighborhood commercial, especially where it's on a major road there. And if that makes it more marketable, so be it. You know, we've routinely and repeatedly expressed a willingness to do what it takes to bring commercial, and especially job centers into our city. So if you guys find that that's the best route to go, you know, we would be, I think at least I can speak for myself, I would be amenable to that, so.
Well, on that note, we're not limiting our marketing to neighborhood commercial. The neighborhood commercial is allowed in the MR zone, and
Right.
that's why it's referred to that way. We know the council would, if we got a buyer that was general commercial or office park, coming in for a rezone would be not a hard thing to do.
Right.
And so we're not putting any limits on what the users could be or limiting them to neighborhood commercial. If you've got a user of any type that's commercial job center, bring them to us and we're happy to look at that and
Okay.
do what's necessary with the city. And we've expressed that the council would be cooperative, so
Okay.
hopefully I'm not misrepresenting you.
No, I don't think you are. We've, you know, over the past 3 or 4 meetings, I think every meeting we've said, you know, yeah, go ahead.
If I can butt in for just a second, sorry. One of the things that on that is, I think that it's hard for businesses who are kind of looking for land. They say, oh, well, that's mixed use, that's neighborhood commercial. They're not even gonna look at it. If you don't zone it, business park, regional commercial, it's gonna be a lot harder sell than if you have it this, you know, fluffy, we've got mixed residential that happens to have this neighborhood commercial component. So I actually would rather see it zoned that way because you can always come back and rezone. You can always come back and rezone. So if you get, you know, a few years down the road and it's not viable, then you come back and say, it's not viable, and then we make adjustments. So that's, you mean, yeah.
No, I'm
Sorry.
Okay, Councilman Podeska.
Yeah, I just have big issues with the first 2 parcels. They didn't. I'm kidding.
Yes.
Yeah, so to try to speed this up a little bit, I have the same reservations as far as going out and trying to sell it within a 2-year period. Just in the standpoint that, you know, it could be priced wrong. You could say it's priced in the market, but it's on the high end of the market. And so to have that stipulation there is kind of like, in a way, just asking, let's make it residential instead of trying the commercial. Also with, you know, the market's strong, but, you know, it's starting to slow down a bit. And so with that happening, we're changing zonings or requirements based on what the market might do. And so that's also a gray area for me. I do agree with the regional commercial aspects. I mean, trying to get, especially for that many homes, having some sort of commercial aspect that has job creation, so office buildings and whatnot, would be, I think for those homeowners that are abutting that lot would agree to that more. I am open to, for that lot 3, kind of compromising some of the southern portion of the lot 3, so that could be more residential on the southern end, and then having more of the commercial. Because as far as commercial coming that far down on Old Saratoga, it doesn't seem to make sense. And so for me, it's kind of like, if you had it come down to, let's see, it's 1235 south on the road that's just east of that project. It's almost halfway on the boundary line. So kind of halfway point on lot 3, if the southern half of that was residential and the northern half was regional commercial. It's just kind of getting the commercial closer to Pioneer Crossing. Coming too far down on Old Saratoga just didn't make much sense.
So are you running your line east to west or north to south? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't have a mouse. It's
I think I've got it.
Yeah, it's that 1235 South Road across is.
Parcel 3.
Just one thing to,
Yeah.
See that crossroad between the church and the houses? Is that what I'm talking about? No, further. Yeah, up there. No, next one.
What is the next one down? Yeah. It's right there. Yep. So that's 1235 South. So that's the one connection road for the neighborhood on the east, and so to have them connect into the future neighborhood on the other side.
one thing to keep in mind too, if you are considering regional commercial, it's always easier to rezone it now than have to rezone it later and have the public hearings and all the mess that you could go through, as well as the possibility of referenda. So just keep that in mind if you do want to assign a different zoning than the neighborhood commercial. Now would be a great time to do that.
Both ways, right? If we zone it regional commercial or business park now, and then they want to change back the other way, that's always a possibility. I mean, either way, but it's easier to go down zone usually. As far as the residents are concerned, how's that?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
You can't just have it be like, oh, maybe a future council will maybe revert them back.
Right. I agree. I agree with that.
Language that says they can. And will get the zone change kind of thing.
Yeah, if you're just looking strictly at the issue of referenda and also any sort of public opposition, now is a good time to do that.
Yeah.
It seems like many of you are realizing, and I think we would agree, that 23 acres of commercial, it's just too much right there.
Yeah.
It's not.
But if you had like the business park, you stepped away, Chriselle, but what I was saying was what I was waiting my turn, so I'm sorry, you can go back, definitely keep talking, but you brought up a good point. If we do give you that regional commercial, it gives you this marketability, because then a business park or whatever coming in, but we need to have in the contract that you will get the MR zone or the consistency so that you can have the homes if you can't ever sell that. So you still need that protection. So it can't be maybe a future council will give you a down zone. We need to have something. I think it's fair to say that you need to have some protection there. You can still do neighborhood commercial kinds of things in a regional commercial zone. It just makes it so that potential buyers aren't, to Shelley's point, they're not going to be shying away because, oh, do we need to go in and get regional commercial zoning now? You say the council is amenable, but there's elections this summer. Elections have consequences. I mean, right? And so it's so much unsurety, and I think that we need to create as much absoluteness so that you can sell it more easily than adding more ambiguity. And I just really want to point out again, if you do the finances, you guys, on that land, they are absolutely very motivated to sell this as commercial, because the interest, the payments, the things that they're paying on, it does not benefit them to put homes 3 years from now, because they will probably take a loss. But I think the reason why they're willing is because of the other two properties. If only that property was available, we would not be sitting here today. So it's very much to their interest to sell that. I think that, and then my last point too, and then I think that we also need to have a clause in there that that D.R. Horton cannot sell it to another developer to build homes, and like have a contract on the side that says, here, you can own this land in 2 years. If you don't, we don't sell commercial. So they have a back door. Right. You know what I'm saying? So they could 6 months from now, oh, Ivory, you want that? Great. Give us money. Here's a private contract. All this behind the scenes. We got to keep selling this for 2 years.
They either sell it to a commercial developer or develop themselves.
Right. Because we can't have them, because you could easily do a private agreement, sell it, or have an agreement that says, as soon as this 2-year mark ends, now Ivory Home builds, we have our protection. So again, this is just that transparency that you were talking about, Stephen, and I think that's really key. And I don't think that's their interest at all, but again, if we're going to give this kind of revert back potentially, we need to have as many backstops and protections as possible. So, sorry, Porter.
Can I ask before you move on, is the council of the mindset that it would make sense to reduce the commercial acreage now? Or do you think 23 is the number to stick with for commercial?
If you're using regional commercial as a park, I think that's a right size. You know, if you want to stick with neighborhood commercial, then I think we would talk about shrinking.
I see.
And then if a buyer comes in 6 months from now and wants part of it, then let's just knock it out and be done. And say, put your home, put the building in.
You're talking about the buyer comes in for
Part of it, but closer to your point.
Yeah.
They want the 15 acres and then there's 5 acres left over. Well, please, we're not going to find a 5-acre buyer, right? So on the inside, next to residential. I think that would be the time that we negotiate.
So that would be good to add into the agreement as well then, that concept.
You don't have to find a buyer for the entire
Right.
thing. That's a good point.
But more than 1/3 of an acre.
A good point.
We got a cell tower, that's commercial.
No. Yeah.
That's been doing this, Nora, haven't you? That's been doing North Shore. Do you know is it the Jorgensen property that's north of this, what their zoning is? Johansson? Isn't it regional commercial?
Well, Johansson's kind of complicated. It was approved last year as an annexation, and the zoning that was designated to it, I think, is light industrial.
Oh, because they're doing the
in the
RV
short
park.
term.
Right.
Because they're doing, and the specifics, it's in a development
Right.
agreement. The specifics says it's for vehicle storage only.
Right.
They don't have to pay, but they have to do a drivable surface. And they have to put up a fence within 2 years. And we're working, actually, they've gotten a CUP, or we're working on a CUP in order to make that happen. And then either when they decide to develop into something else, or within 10 years from the development agreement date, it reverts to regional commercial.
Regional commercial, okay. That's my question, just because, you know, I mean, this becomes much, if you can get that whole corner, it becomes a much more attractive thing to sell, I'm sure. So, you know, that was just my question is, you know, we would want the zoning to match. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have this little sliver of regional commercial and then, so those two eventually need to probably be the same zone, but.
Yeah, no, I have some good comments to go back and we'll consider everything that you said. Part of our consideration is that, you know, this is a willing seller that wants to annex in, but it's an all or nothing kind of a deal. So we've got to hold that relationship together as well. So there's lots of pieces to fit. So I appreciate your input, but part of it is it's, you know, and we'll have to evaluate whether designating it general commercial upfront can be mitigated. Does that make sense? Because we totally get it. And like I said, we're marketing it that way. We want it to go and be this viable center. But there's a lot of complicated pieces as well in the fact that it hasn't got frontage and UDOT's going to expand and the Johansson parcel gets cut in half when that happens. So there's lots to think about. So
I still have, can I ask a couple more questions sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
I just have a couple questions. I didn't really get any clear direction on a couple things. A few of you mentioned you didn't want the 2-year revert clause. You wanted more of like a 3-year or longer reverter clause. Is that a consensus of the council for that?
I'm okay with 2.
Okay. But as far as the majority, do you want 2, 3 years, longer?
Well, 3 years technically, 1 year, and then when they bought, 2 more years. So.
Okay. So you're looking at about 3 years then. Okay.
So if we add another year, then it's 4 years.
Right.
And that's almost for interest and things.
years from recordation.
But technically, you could go
Okay.
down and do all your surveys you need to do and plat it, not tomorrow, but, I mean, obviously, it's exaggerated again, right? But you could go down and plat it tomorrow.
Would you be okay with 3 years?
Right.
And just having it not have this recordation to say 3 years from when you get the zone?
So 3 years from this agreement, or, I think our better option is the way that we've got it worded with the plat.
It's marketable then.
Because I have to raise the site, I have to put in the improvements, I have to do all that, and I don't want to bond for $30 million.
Well, because
So-
it starts to slip. You might wait 3 years, 4 years, so we have a
Right.
lot more protection if we do it that way.
Right,
I know.
but, I
And
mean,
then, okay, so you're talking about 2 years from plat recordation, which will be more like
Yes.
3 years or longer possibly. So the other question, there are a couple different directions you were heading. One was allow the reverter clause for the entire parcel or only for a certain portion and keep the regional commercial in perpetuity or until, not in perpetuity, but till the council rezoned it.
We'd be willing to, even in the 3-year period or 2 year, we'd be willing to sparse it if part of it came in as commercial and it was like a 5
Like if
acre
they only had a
island.
buyer for 15 of the 23 acres, then we would be willing at that time to say, that's fine, go ahead and do the regional commercial or business park for 15, and we'll take the other and make it the MR.
The blend.
Councilmember Porter and Poduska had mentioned, we don't want to have the reverter clause over the entire portion and save some of it.
You
with
may
the
have to
commercial
have two
district.
versions,
Okay.
quite honestly. We're split
Maybe
as the
give you some
council.
options then.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
We didn't have a consensus here, so that.
Okay.
We'll give you some
Do you
options.
need anything else?
nope, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have the the Parks Master Plan update. We have enough marks here. We could have enough.
Hi, my name is Lisa Benson, and I'm with Landmark Design. And we also have Mark Vlasic here, the owner of Landmark Design. We're the consultants doing the update on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And I'm just here to give you a quick update on the process here. I'm going to try and fly through some of these slides. So just a quick update on where we're at in our process. We've been meeting with a technical committee throughout the project, and we've had a web page up throughout the process for people to comment through. We've been doing focus interviews with staff, and we had a public scoping meeting, and then we have a couple of other ways we're reaching out to the public. We're utilizing a new tool called Social Pinpoint, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is an interactive online mapping program that we've, another way to reach out to people. And then we had an online survey to gather a wider range of opinions. And we're right now just beginning the draft plan stage, moving into that phase, working closely with our technical committee to work out some of the details as we move forward. So our public scoping meeting, just a side note, we had pretty small attendance at the public scoping meeting, which seems to be getting a little more typical these days, but we did get some good feedback from those that were in attendance. And we started that meeting off with a visual preference survey where we show a series of 50 slides and have the attendees rate those images. And this slide shows the top 6 images. So images related to trails, the beach, waterfront, and Neptune Park and trails came out on the top. And the bottom 6 slides, they showed community parks, kind of agricultural, dog parks, and kind of more of the sports activities, rugby and that sort of thing. It's just...
What kind of numbers are you talking about where you participated and gave these preferences?
This was more of a focus group.
Well, no, this was the public scoping meeting. And this was actually, we only had 8 people sign in. So
People are telling us these things.
we had actually more staff, probably as many staff participate in this.
So on this one.
Yeah.
On this one, when we were talking about it in our technical meeting afterwards, we really were talking about wanting to treat this more as a focus group because it just
Not
didn't.
even.
It's not representative. It's just another,
Not because it's biased, because it's people who choose to come.
exactly.
Have a definite personal agenda. Because I can tell you right now, dog parks, if you went to the whole city, would not be in the bottom 6.
Right.
Right.
So, you know what I'm saying?
And this is not meant to be like a
Yeah.
Put some parameters.
Yeah, and it's not-
trying to be difficult.
And you'll
Yeah,
see
yeah.
that when we get to the social pinpoint.
And even the survey is opt-in, not opt-out.
Yeah,
And
we'll talk about that.
Just my background, just so you know.
Oh, yeah.
This is, everyone has their strengths. Mine is statistics.
Yeah.
And customer experience, loyalty, quality.
And that's kind of one of the hard things, is that as a council, we chose to not do a
Statistically valid
scientific
survey. Yeah.
study.
Yes.
Right.
Everyone in the city.
Because we were concerned about keeping the money down,
It's
right?
expensive to send everyone a survey,
It is.
and just like people vote, they don't turn it in.
Yeah, and so just to note, the visual preference survey is meant more as a tool to get people's minds jogging about, and thinking about parks and recreation issues. And some preferences do tend to come to the top, but, there's all kinds of factors that can go into what they choose here. The general comments that came out of that public scoping meeting were that people are generally pleased with the parks that are in the city. They would like to see more beachfront, more unique parks like skate parks, that sort of thing. Trails, the big concern is filling gaps and addressing safety issues. They like city events and would love to see a farmer's market come back eventually. And then the need for community gathering spaces and possibly a city cemetery. Focus interviews, we met with several departments, several staff members, and just talking about their needs and what they see, some of their concerns. Generally, they're well-staffed, but there are a few departments that could use a little more assistance, and they just want us to look at other cities to do a little bit of comparison. And as far as maintenance, you guys don't have too many complaints about maintenance, but those complaints that do come in are generally about weeds, watering, and vandalism. And tree mortality is one of your biggest challenges out here with soil, water condition. You guys, I'm not telling you anything new, so.
There's that answer. There's a solution. We use it because my tree's too big.
Let's see. So I wanted to get to the survey, and as Councilman McComber mentioned that we had, this survey was online. Anybody that wanted to participate could log in and fill this out. There was no way to control if people responded more than one time or, emailed all their friends. So we just take it for what it is. It's another source of information and another source of feedback. But we did have an incredible amount of response. We had over 2,000 people respond to the survey, and over 1,600 filled out every question. So that was a pretty good response, probably the highest that we've seen just on a casual online survey.
Did you capture the IP address in that survey by chance?
I can't remember. I'd have to get into the data.
Because that'd be easy just to do, because if it's the same IP address 50 times, then you got it.
Yeah.
That's
We don't have that many people. We're big families out here, but we're only like 4 or something.
Well, and we figure if somebody really wants to take the time to fill out all of those questions multiple times. Yeah.
I bet you there may be 500 done by the Barch family.
Let me just tell you.
Yeah.
Trust me, we're like one of the youngest cities to have a referendum, and it was very successful in the city.
Okay. So looking at responses to park questions on the survey, over 60% of the city meets their needs for recreation and leisure through the city's facilities. So your parks and trails are a major way that your residents meet their needs, and then also federal lands. And the most popular parks, not surprising, are Neptune, Harvest, and Shea. The primary reason for people using their most used park is that it's close to home. So distribution is really important when we're looking at planning for future parks. And then the most desired improvement to their parks were trees. I think people are, it's just a newer city, more open, and that was one of the main items that came up. We also asked people how important it is to have public parks within walking distance on a scale of 0 to 10. And the average response was 8.3, so it's very important to residents to have public parks within a half mile, within walking distance. Again, speaking to the need for good distribution within the city. And we asked what parks and recreation facilities are most needed, and the recreation center came out on top at 72%, followed by a splash pad, a lakefront beach, and specialty parks. So that could be anything like dog park, skate park, bike parks, that sort of thing. And then less than a third of residents use fields or playgrounds at local schools or amenities at private developments and HOA facilities. Moving on to recreation, less than 50% of the city has participated in city recreation programs in the last 12 months. And the top programs came out as soccer, followed by youth basketball, baseball, and then flag football. And reasons for not participating, just the programs that are offered are not of interest, and people may not have children, and that they're involved in other non-city recreation programs. Events, over just about 60% of the residents have participated in your community events, which is a great number. And the most popular events are Splash Days, Summer Celebration, Fall Festival, and then the train rides at Shea Park. Moving on to trails, you have a good portion of your city that also uses your trail system, over 60%, and most use your trails monthly or weekly. And over 80% of people indicated that they would use the trails more often if they were more complete or connected. And then not surprising that most people use the trails for walking, jogging, and hiking, and then recreational biking. There are smaller percentages that use it for other things like inline skating and OHV use. Most popular trails are the Jordan River Parkway, Harvest Hills Trails, and then your Redwood Road Pathway. And the most desired improvements to the trail system are filling gaps and linking neighborhoods. Those two stood out, and then also more lighting, safety crossings and safer crossings and restrooms. And we did hear quite a bit about safe crossings through the social pinpoint, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Overall, the city, the 48% of your residents are satisfied with how you are providing parks, recreation, and trails overall. And parks, you can see people are generally more satisfied. Over 60% are satisfied or very satisfied. And recreation, that drops down to about 30%. And this may speak to the lack of a recreation center. And then trails, it's a little higher than that at 41%. And overall, you can see that the numbers that are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied overall are pretty low in all of those categories. And we asked how much people would be willing to pay per year for maintenance or improvements to existing parks. And that number averaged at $38. And when we asked how much would you be willing to pay per year for new facilities, that number jumped up to $49.
Is that $49 a year?
Yes. Yes, yeah. $49 a year.
I guess we're not getting a rec center.
What, $4 a month?
Yeah, I guess.
I guess if we put it on a referendum, we know how that's going to happen.
And there's a separate question about the rec center. Yeah. So, and we also asked, let's see. So how willing people would be to support a tax increase to fund the construction of a recreation center, with 0 being not willing and 10 being very willing, and that came in, 6.5, so kind of somewhere a little above the middle.
Really?
Yeah. And we also asked how much would you be willing to pay per year in additional funding for a rec center, and that number was 139 average. So.
Per person.
And you still
So we didn't get that specific in the question. So this question's always fun. We asked them, we say, you have $100 to spend, what would you spend it on? What are your priorities? And with your hypothetical $100, recreation center came in at the top at 50 of those $100. Community swimming pool came in at 37. Right, exactly. And then you can see lakefront beach, and then walking and biking trails, and preservation of open space. Those are kind of the main priorities in that question.
Can you remind me of the time frame of the survey again?
It was approximately 2 to 3 weeks in January, kind of the last half of January. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We asked some more general questions about aesthetics, and you can see a majority feel that aesthetics and the general appearance of the city are very important, and most of them also agree that the city's appearance is good right now. And some of their favorite things about the city are the views, the open space, the lakes. The lake, pretty not surprising.
The overall appearance of the city. You're talking 80, almost 90% said it was good, fair,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's very few that say it's not. And then we asked what they disliked: high-density housing, lack of trees, traffic, and construction.
But they're here now, so they just want anyone else to come.
And then we asked about public cemeteries and burial plots. And you can see it's almost split. A slight majority said that it would be great if the city would provide a cemetery and burial plots. And we followed that up with a question about how much would you be willing to pay per plot? And that was $513.
Plots run a little higher than that right now.
Yeah. We also, so we looked at the demographics of the survey. Some of these lined up with the characteristics of the city overall, and some were skewed. And you can see the top one, the survey was heavily skewed towards females. 66% of the survey respondents were females. Only 31% were male.
Was it only, did you advertise only through social media mostly? Or?
Yeah, through social media, the website, yeah.
Social media is more heavily.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you can see the age.
Do we use the email pool that we have, like the rec department? Do you use the to send that email?
I'm not sure if David, worked with Heston to reach out through that.
Because it's dealing so much with recreation, we could have easily used that email pool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you can see the biggest age group that responded were between 24 and 34. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not too surprising. And you can see the majority own their home. And this was interesting, the years in Saratoga, the biggest portion, have lived here for 2 to 5 years. Then the next largest group was 6 to 10 years. Household sizes, again, this kind of lines up with your large average household size. And the age of children at home, again, you can see they're pretty large portions of the city that have children, between ages 6 and 11 and 0 to 5. And the household income, this also generally aligns. Yes. And you can see from this map here, the response rate from each of these neighborhoods. People just indicated at the end of the survey.
No, I was actually joking about it. I'm like, I wish our neighborhood would vote this well. If our neighborhood would vote this well, we'd do great.
Yeah, my neighborhood votes much better than that.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to mention, though, is on this is neighborhood 6. Pretty much it seems the neighborhood population-wise are fairly evenly split, except for that 6th area, and that's kind of light on the housing area. So it makes sense that it would have the least amount of input.
I would expect it to be higher, too. It's pretty dense. That's my neighborhood.
Yeah.
1,200 homes.
Yeah. So
Mayor.
anyway, it was just kind of an interesting phenomenon. So.
Yep.
So David Johnson. Yeah, so David Johnson texted in an answer to your question you asked earlier, and he indicated that yes, Heston's email list was used.
Great.
So.
Okay. Great. So I also wanted to briefly touch on this new tool that we've been testing out on this project called Social Pinpoint. So it's a new web-based platform where we can upload GIS layers and let people go in and comment directly. They can drag and drop pins that say, I like this, or I have a concern, or I have a question. They can even post photos, and we've had several people post photos, which has been kind of a nice interactive tool. And we tend to get the type of feedback on Social Pinpoint now that we used to get at face-to-face meetings. And the turnout was a little better too. So we had 751 unique visits, 693 unique users. People spent an average of 20 minutes on the site, which I thought was really good. In the end, we had 44 people that left 89 comments. And the little pie chart down there, the orange were ideas and suggestions. The red is I have a concern. The blue is this should be improved. And then the green is I like this, and the gray was I have a question. So you can just kind of see how the questions in general broke down.
So the 693, they did unique maybe drop points, but they didn't send any comments?
I think that there's a much larger number than who actually left comments. So I think that they were just in there reading what other people had.
And there's also the ability of when you see a comment, so like I might have had a question or concern in one area, and I go, oh wait, there's already a comment there, what is it? And you can thumbs it up or thumbs it down at the same time too.
Yeah, so they can like or dislike
comments. Which is
comments.
kind of cool.
So as part of that unique users, they were participating in that
cool
It'd
platform.
be nice to know how many people actually like got involved, like in conversations with the ups and downs.
Yeah, I don't, do you have a way of tracking or like?
I don't know. I can see the numbers.
Yeah.
I can see the numbers of likes and dislikes, but I don't know that there's a way to necessarily track that by user and see how many different people were involved. But it's just nice to see that many different eyes were on the project page.
People getting involved in the 9.
Yeah. So this chart shows a breakdown of the comments. So I go into each of the comments and I categorize, kind of tag them what the comment is addressing. So the largest segments there are trails and connectivity and parks. Those are the two blues. The parks is the darker blue. And then the red is open space. And safety is that next kind of on the greenish blue that's down towards the left. So I would say that, trails and safety definitely came up as one of the main issues. And we were able to get a good level of detail too. People could say, this intersection is really dangerous, or I have trouble crossing here, or there needs to be a crossing here. So that gives us another layer of feedback that we can include in the plan as we move forward with proposed facilities. So in addition to all of this input from the public involvement process, we're also working through different analyses, looking at your park acres per 1,000 residents. That's one of the ways that we'll look at your park service levels. And then we also look at distribution. So we're looking at your existing and your planned park facilities and overlaying that with your residential areas and just seeing where you have gaps even after you implement what is planned. And then also, of course, looking at your trail system and what sort of hot spots we need to address and if there are any updates to the proposed trail system. So like I said, right now we are in the beginning stages of the draft plan. So we're working closely with our technical committee and kind of trying to filter all of this public involvement and see how that fits into moving forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll move on to public input. Time has been set aside for the public to express ideas, concerns, comments. For subject matter not listed on the agenda, please be respectful in your comments. Please state your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody here for public input tonight? If you're here for the public hearing on the budget amendment, you'd be a first, but please hold your comments to that. Okay. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing no public input, I will close it at this time. We're going to go down and come back because we want to spend some time on the legislative updates, but we've got some people here for other items. So we'll move to the public hearing for fiscal year 2019.
So what you have in front of you is our fourth budget amendment for fiscal year 19. Most of the items on there should be familiar to you. There is a correction about halfway down under the general fund. It's under the GL 10456130 for recreation. The amount listed in the column new budget amount is an error. That's the amount it was intended to increase. So the corrected amount there should be $70,950. So that has been corrected, and you can approve it as corrected. And then if you have any other questions, I can answer those for you.
Any questions from the council? Yeah. Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody here for the public hearing on the budget amendments? Okay. Since Thane doesn't have a comment, we will close the fiscal year public hearing for 2019 budget amendment and either take comments. Oops, Councilman Wilden.
I was going to make a motion.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the fiscal year 2019 budget amendments resolution R19-8 dated today.
Okay, I have a first from Councilman Wilden.
I'll second.
I have a second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion on the
Can we
motion?
add his?
Approve the corrections.
Approve the corrections.
Yeah.
He added a correction to one of the lines.
Yep, approving the corrections as previously discussed.
Amended second.
I've amended first and second. Any further comments? Councilman Porter?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
McComber?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Councilman Wilden, we're moving to financial services contract award. I understand you want to excuse yourself for a minute.
Yeah, for the minutes, I'll recuse myself, even though that I've been counseled that there isn't a conflict of interest. One of the entities bidding on the financial services contract is the company that I work for, or a division of, so I'm going to leave the room.
Okay, financial services contract award.
I'm almost done.
Man, I thought this would be quick without you.
Close the door
Still have
behind
it
you.
So in the month of December, we put out a request for proposals for a financial services contract. State auditor recommends that no contract exceed a length of 5 years. And so in compliance with that, we published the RFP. We received 2 bids. Myself, Owen, and Shalice reviewed those. And both firms were very well represented. In the end, it came down to a cost difference. And as you can see in the recommendation, we did make a recommendation for you guys to approve that contract, which will be for services as needed. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that Zion Bank Public Finance in the staff report is listed as the most cost-effective.
Correct, yeah. Okay.
When we approve this, so we know.
Appreciate that.
With that, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve the financial services contract award resolution R19-10 dated today.
Second.
I have a first from Councilwoman Barch. I have a second from Councilman Podeska. Any further discussion? Podeska?
Aye.
Wilden is absent. McComber?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I'll entertain a motion to invite Councilman Wilden back.
Denied.
Okay, Star Haven preliminary and final plats. Ken Evans, applicant.
Whoa, a little different level on the microphone. This is Star Haven, which you folks looked at last year and granted a change in zoning and land use. And now they're back in for preliminary plat. They have a level of detail on their plats now that's really at a final plat stage, but we do that at a staff level, and technically your jurisdiction is preliminary plat. So on the location map, it's off of Crossroads Boulevard. I think you are all pretty familiar with its location. There are 2 other projects which are adjacent, which are also moving forward toward construction. And so we're hoping that all the roads and infrastructure will all hook up at about the same time. So it was rezoned to R110, R19, and rural residential in February last year. There was a development agreement, and it has been executed. And the proposed plats are consistent with the concept plan and in compliance with the development agreement. So there are 3, sorry, this is a little small. There are 3 plats actually that we're looking at. One is called Star Haven Estates, and it's 6 single-family residences. And the total acreage, as you can see, is 3.17 acres. They're large lots. And the allowed density would be at this zoning 9 lots, and they're proposing 6. And then the Star Haven Villas, which is the 55 over community. This is a footprint development that has 51 individual, it'll have 51 individual little houses that are 1 level and then a basement. And there are 51 units, which is proposed, and They could do up to 53 if they wanted to really max it out. And then the Star Haven subdivision is the rest of it, which is the home of Ken Evans, and that is 2.13 acres, and the zoning is rural residential. So as a part of the Star Haven Village, there's adequate open space to meet the requirements of section 19.19 of the Development Code, which is the open space and amenities section. And all three of the plats, all three of the communities will have access to the common facilities that are in the villas. And in the villas, most of the open space is in a sort of a center area, and it includes things like a putting green, pickleball courts, bocce courts, horseshoes, covered patio fire pits, and some other miscellaneous benches and things like that. And it does meet the minimum point requirement to comply with 1919. It's kind of a complicated formula, but they do meet the minimum requirement. There will also be a clubhouse in the villas, which will have just meeting spaces, maybe a small space for somebody to come in and do hair once in a while for the residents. Nothing that's will encourage outside folks coming in using it as a commercial use. It's really in support of the 55 plus living. Trails were a big part of the discussion when this was rezoned. And in the development agreement, it was fairly specific about what the trails requirements were. And what was agreed to is that the red line on this map, and this is right out of the development agreement, is along the other side of the street of 400 West, where there's an existing trail or sidewalk, and the agreement was that they would have to add 5 feet to the existing sidewalk in that location. They have the property is owned by a third party, by IHC, and they have gotten permission from them, and there's a separate agreement that we have that indicates that. Then there's the blue, which is frontage improvements along Crossroad Boulevard. I added a condition of approval to this presentation, and you'll see it in a minute, that makes clear that they're responsible for installing and long-term maintenance of those frontage improvements, and that they be consistent with the frontage improvements that we require along frontages of our major roads, and that final landscape plans be reviewed and approved by the staff. And then there's this little triangle that's, we think is UDOT property, but it's somewhere in the mix of ending up being Saratoga Springs property, and then maybe we'll end up with ownership by Ken Evans in the Star Haven, and we are working toward trying to figure that out. Whether it's owned by us or by Ken, he would be responsible for, again, maintaining installation and maintenance of that area. And we're doing some work trying to figure out how we get that property from UDOT, if in fact they own it. There's some inconsistencies in the county records. So the Planning Commission made a recommendation to forward a positive recommendation to you folks for the preliminary plat, and they added the condition number 4, which talks about 2 separate means of vehicular access onto a collector or arterial, and shall be required when the total number of equivalent residential units it's served by a single means of access will exceed 50. And there was some discussion about this. This is right out of the code. Right, well they're going to build 50 and there's going to be 1 lot empty until the next road comes. Actually, their final phase is 3 of the building footprints. However, the other properties are moving forward soon. So it looks like there will be a secondary access pretty much right at the beginning. But this is straight from the code, so we've included it. And then I added a couple conditions here, condition 4 and 5. All frontage improvements along Crossroad Boulevard will be required to be landscaped with a trail consistent with ST11, which is what the development agreement says. It's a standard that shows the width of the trail. And that final landscaping and irrigation plans are required to be submitted and approved for all frontage improvements. The developer will install the improvements and the homeowners association will be responsible for maintenance. Just some extra emphasis on that. And all the other conditions the Planning Commission recommended. Other options are continuance and denial.
Okay.
Ken? Paul? In your Dropbox, you also should have received the Planning Commission report of action. We do these when there's not enough time to get it in your packet. This was just heard last week. Not a lot of discussion, a little bit as to what the secondary access condition was all about. Excuse me. There was some concern that the original discussions during the rezone stage, there was some talk about having the 6 lots not be a part of the homeowners association and not having access to the amenities, and that they be required to pay a fee in lieu, and the applicant has chosen that all 3 of those areas would be able to use the common amenities. And that there was concern about no amenities being provided for children. For example, people visiting folks in the 55 plus. But then it was also mentioned that there's a city park within about a 2-minute walk. So the Planning Commission didn't add a condition of approval or anything. There was just discussion.
Councilwoman McComber?
So for me personally, I just am hung up on those 3. I know that the next neighborhood will be coming in, and so I'm trying to think, because Councilwoman Barge mentioned precedence, and I think that's a very important thing, and that's something that we try and protect in this, when we're making decisions. My concern is that you're coming in now, and you're ready to go and get going. There's lots of indicators that showing there might be a downturn or a slowing down a little bit over the next few years. What if that neighborhood doesn't come in? Then I have 3 weed collecting lots in a neighborhood where you don't want weeds and things that can spread because it's a trip hazard. It's a senior community. And also they become dumping grounds, and then neighbors get mad at neighbors. So for me personally, I'm thinking to protect precedents, maybe we could do something where in the development agreement we can put a clause or something in there that says that at the time, if you're getting close to wanting to build those 3, and the neighbor having to come in, and that the fire marshal thinks that the extra 3 isn't going to create undue burden on protecting those homes, that you would be able to allow to just finish your project and be done. Because there's an economies of scale as well. To have to redeploy all of your contractors for 3 is going to be your cost is going to go way up. So just trying to be fair, because it's the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, but I'm trying to protect precedents, because another developer comes in and they have 58 and they're like, well, it's only 5 more than what you did before. So I don't know, maybe we can do it through a development agreement or something. I just want to make sure that you can finish your project and be done and not be stuck with these 3 little empty lots if the neighbors don't go in. So that's just my only comment. Everything else, you're right in line with what we'd already talked about and stuff, and I appreciate your patience with us as we work with the county to try and figure out these land things. But I think that really your project with the basements are going to be really very successful. I think there's a demand for that kind of, obviously we're seeing other projects come in, and I really do see that we're going to be pushing our average age in Saratoga Springs up from 42 a little higher. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilman Podeska?
Yeah, I agree with trying to work with that, to not have empty lots just for the sake of that. But if we can have it in the development agreement so we don't have to worry about, others. One other thing, I mean, Councilwoman Barch will speak to this as well, is the northern boundary lots need to align with the adjacent lots. And I'll leave that to Councilwoman Barch, but I wanted to bring that alignment up.
Dave, could you pull up the city map? I think there's going to be a question relative to that. And then zoom in right on the northern boundary on the trail corridor there. So just real quickly, the 50 lots is codified. So if you want to change that, then that would be a change to the code. It's not something we can do through agreement.
So basically, there's no variable at all. It's 50, you can't do anything about it, other than change the whole code.
Yes, that's correct.
And there will
The thing
actually.
is, it's not necessarily about compliance with the code. It's more or less a timing issue. And when that's going to take place, there's lots of things that we can do at the time. We could potentially put in just a road base type of surface until, just to meet the minimum requirements of the code. I think we've got enough flexibility in the code with our bonding process and all that we can cover it without creating some exception in the development agreement that might create problems and set a precedence that could be a problem for us in the future.
So are you saying it's more like guidelines than?
No, it's a requirement. I'm not saying waive the requirement, but we'll have some flexibility as staff as we get closer to that and
To meet that second
drawings,
entrance? Is that what you're saying?
and approving performance bonds and so forth.
And actually, the total number of units is 51 plus 6, 57 plus 1. So it's 58 total units. So allowing the last few townhomes or footprint development, it's bigger than that. It's 8 units.
If you play that card, they do have 2 access points. They have one for the 6 and one for the 51. They have 2 access points, but you can't play.
It doesn't, but they're not, it doesn't meet the
really the
code.
6 doesn't count. It's 51. You can't put the 6 and count it towards.
Because the 6 have their own access point.
So you can't count them in the access of requiring 50. Because as soon as you say we're going to count them.
Yeah, you're right.
Then they
The
have
6
2.
has a separate access point. You're
Feel free to
absolutely
remove
right.
that as a condition, because we have that codified in the code, and we'll work with the developer and allow for some flexibility in the bond agreement, the installation of improvements agreement that we signed at the time.
You can do like a rock base or something.
Oh, yeah, there are lots of options, and we're working with those options on other developments.
We'll be flexible in how we apply the code.
Yeah, and again,
Those-
the additional condition was based on a request by the planning commission.
Okay.
So if you could, David, zoom in, you see how the trail is a little bit wider? Nope, go on the northern edge and then go west a little bit. You see how the current trail is a little bit wider? And then the new proposed subdivision is narrowing it down. And I believe that was what Councilmember Podeska and Councilmember Barch were talking about. So
That's the central Utah water. Yeah, that's the central Utah water corridor through there. And it's underneath the trail. And so you can't, from everything we've done so far in the city, you can't have actual utilities like that going through private property. We've kept those out of private properties, put them into trail corridors. And also when we were originally talking, when Central Utah Water went through, at the time you didn't want to sell the property to them. And so that easement was recorded across there. It's agricultural property. Things like that are more easily done. But where we're going to residential type things, then we just need to take that and move that property line down to be consistent with the edge of that Central Utah water line. And, I mean, they all still fit all the code issues. It's not, doesn't change anything that way. Those lots are big, it's fine. Likewise with the rural residential lot. But we need to be consistent in how we treat our utilities.
So would that then parcel be deeded to Central Utah, or?
I believe it's actually City Saratoga Springs, or is that the one Central Utah? Which one is it, Mark?
That one is Central Utah.
Okay.
But if you zoom in on the overview, you'll see that there's a fence that extends out, and it's going to be on the final parcel, the 2-acre parcel. The fence extends out and around that, and so I don't know exactly where the utility is, but if you wanted to carry that Central Utah corridor across, then that would
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that was our original agreement when we went in and did that trail back there, is that when it came time to develop that would be turned over to, I can't remember if it was the city or Central Utah Water, however that worked, but that would be equalized through that open space area. And it's pretty consistent with what we've done in other areas where we don't allow actual big utilities like that to be inside of private lots. We've turned them, they have to have an open space corridor through there, or a trail corridor through there, or in a park strip or wherever. But it wouldn't change. But as far as, meeting your code and stuff, you'll be fine. It's not a big deal.
So I don't believe that that's a condition that was passed by the Planning Commission. So if that's something that you're concerned about, then you'd want to make that motion.
Can I make another suggestion too, just based off of direction that the council's given us in the past about trying to eliminate the need for HOAs? I think that you could make an interpretation that those large single-family lots actually do meet the open space requirements. First of all, the first part of it is the requirement refers to a percentage of the overall project area. So you could make an interpretation that the project includes the senior living facility. And then the other portion of the open space requirement is meeting the recreational needs of the residents. Since the developer is putting in a trail on the opposite side of the road, you could make that reasonable interpretation that it meets that aspect of it. And you could eliminate the need and include those single-family lots in the HOA.
Except for they want to be part of the HOA because they want access to all those amenities. So I would assume that they would be paying to help maintain those, wouldn't they?
They would be helping to pay for that, but they would also be part of an HOA, and they may not actually enjoy that.
Well, I mean, what would
It's okay. What would you prefer?
Yeah. Was the intent to make them part of the HOA and to make you part of the HOA that's then maintaining and having access to that? Or was the intent to give them access without having to pay for it?
The original intent was to allow me to go and use the putting green.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. If that's their desire, I don't see any reason to change that.
Yeah, so I thought that was the original intent, was to allow that for that
But
use.
Is it appropriate for me to comment?
Yes, yes, yes.
I guess I'm a little confused on the northern boundary, the easement that I have with Central Utah Water. I don't understand why that is coming into play at all.
That comes in from the original trail when we put the trail through and all those easements were done originally, that was one of the things is that you were doing an easement until developed because it didn't make sense to move your horse fence and everything else.
No, that wasn't the reason.
That was, okay.
The reason was they offered me either an easement or an offer to sell. They offered that to everyone along there. I opted for an easement because I have a barn back there that this would then make out of compliant. It would be right next, the fence would be right next to the barn.
It would be grandfathered.
And they allowed me the ability to put a fence along there, which they then improved in the process. And I wanted to keep my land. And I'm having some difficulty understanding why that's coming into play at all at this point. I mean, I would be meeting all of the development requirements of a landowner, and I've been compliant with the arrangement that I made with Central Utah Water. I mean, it's on my lot. It was already a residential property.
It was an agricultural residential property, which is always treated differently than other residential uses.
I have a home, and that lot was what's on your view right there is phase 6 is my residential lot. So I guess I'm confused.
I guess from what I recollect when we did the trail is that we eventually would improve this trail. One of the things that they're having issues with right now is the horses because this area is so narrow, the horses that are going through that area go and dump on the sidewalk and it's not being taken care of, which personally I don't mind, but that's how I grew up. Other people mind. And if we widen it out to where it's supposed to be, then the horses have the ability to stay off the actual sidewalk, which is actually better for their legs and hooves too. But besides that, it's kind of been, it was consistent. So I don't know, you know, your particulars of your.
The trail, excuse me for interrupting,
Yeah.
Councilwoman Barge. The trail was designed and put in as it is right now. It was not anticipated to be any wider than it is. I'm well aware of exactly how this was designed because I proposed this trail, and I worked with the previous city council for quite a while to get it in so that we would have an east-west connecting trail.
Yeah.
It was a long, arduous process to get the city to approve to do that.
So,
And so the trail as it exists, the only reason that it's wider there than it is behind my home is not because of the design of the trail. It's because the other property owners wanted to sell and get the money for their property. The trail wasn't designed to be that wide. So I think we're kind of mixing.
so the question I have is, we have an easement. If you put a fence on the property on this, then it really limits access. So would you be willing to say that if they want to, because I'm looking at it as they can maintain, I think this is where you were coming, Kevin, is like they maintain so that it's not a bunch of just weeds and things, but they can't put a fence to block the easement. Because that's really what it comes down to, is because if they want to get into Central Utah wants to get in there, then that adds to the cost, because then they're ripping out fences, trying to get into their access. But
Dave, could you turn off the concept or active layer and then zoom in a little bit more on that corner, northwest corner?
this is
Go out just a little bit. So okay, but and I'm right there. That's the discussion, right? Is that width from where the fence currently goes to, where the fence currently goes to down to that line is the easement line.
right.
So again, that's just the illustrative purposes. I did a quick scan and it looked like it would be 0.09 of an acre if you drew that line straight across what would be the 2 acre lot as part of this subdivision. I did not do it across the other lots, but I you know, it was 0.9 of an acre, roughly speaking, on the backside of that property. 0.09.
So I guess I'm wondering, right now you have a finding in the staff report, information in the staff report, that the project as proposed meets the open space requirements in our code. Are you proposing to change that finding and possibly reduce the open space in another portion of the project?
And I have a different recollection apparently than Ken does, but my understanding is it doesn't meet code for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we don't allow for those utilities to be inside of private lots like that, so especially on those top of the 6 on the cul-de-sac. And we have allowed to go through, you know, agricultural lots as they've been in place for longer and all that kind of stuff. But the other part is from what my recollection, and we have, like I said, we have different recollections, is that we had talked about in those meetings the fact that when this area developed, that it would then be widened out to match it, so we didn't have jogging fence lines, and so that we had more of the dirt area for the horses to walk, because this was supposed to be a rural type trail where the horses could continue to function.
Are you planning on putting a fence
Actually, it was never designed to be a horse trail. I proposed it, but the city did not want to do it. And so I, again, respectfully disagree.
Well, like I said,
and there was a previously platted subdivision there, and so when it went through, there were 2 rural residential lots, and my lot there. I, at one time, had aspirations of having 2 of my children move back on 2-acre lots. That did not happen. But it was a previously platted subdivision, so when Central Utah Water came through there and the easement was granted, it was on residential zoned property. my property and the 2 lots that I owned just to the east.
Are you planning on putting a fence in?
Well, he has a
There's a
fence.
fence in there right now.
All the way to the edge?
Yeah, the only place that looks attractive
Can't see
along
the
the
fence.
whole trail
Yeah,
is
he has a
behind
fence.
my property because there's not a large space there. I spray the weeds and I maintain it. The rest of the entire width there is not maintained well by the city. It's full of weeds, and the people that use the trail complain about it.
Well, that's
I've
my
had a number of
argument,
people
too, is we
asking,
get people to
why
maintain
doesn't the fence come up and connect with yours and make it a better trail and a more consistent trail?
That's what I was getting at, is because allowing people to maintain those other 3 lots, the ones that you're proposing, the 3 of the 6, they could actually maintain up to the trail and prevent the weeds as well. But would you be willing to adjust, so we wouldn't, maybe not, a compromise is not touch yours, but those 3 lots, adjust those so that but then those people can maintain it, because I would. I mean, I live on the golf course and I don't live on the green part, and so I actually maintain the weeds behind all the way to the golf course. Even though it's not my property, I keep the weeds under control. But their actual property, Councilman Barch, so their property would be out of the corridor, but they could still maintain it.
Kind of like we did in Jacob Ranch along
Yeah.
the drainage, where we said your property line ends here, but if you were to,
Yeah, you just can't go and fence it. But then yours would just, so it would jog. The horses would just have to walk on the cement for a second.
Let's put this in perspective. There's a horse barn there right now, but as is public knowledge, IHC is not building a hospital there. That horse operation is going to turn into a development in the relatively near future. IHC will not likely hold on to that property. There will be probably 2 horses that use that trail, and they are both there on my property next to my barn in the pasture. That was one of the reasons that it was not approved as a horse trail when the trail was put in, because it was not approved as a horse trail. And it's not going to be. There's not going to be, in a short period of time, there aren't going to be any horses there to begin with, except for mine. And I would.
The horse trail, we're talking about easement.
Well, it is. That's, I believe that Councilmember Barch is talking about.
The utility.
The utility. She doesn't want utilities in private property.
Well,
and yet that was what was.
That is a code requirement.
Yeah.
One of the things too to look at is the existing residential lot, is that a non-conforming lot? That is one thing to consider. Certainly with the new lots, they have to meet that code requirement. Or is that not being taken care of with this plat?
From what we saw.
No.
That does need to be addressed. That is a code requirement that utilities be located outside of lots.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
As an existing non-conforming lot, you're probably okay there.
This has grandfathering capability, right?
Right. That is a valid point. I'm not sure why that wasn't addressed. Good catch.
I have a comment on the 3 lots.
Those 3 lots.
Yeah. Well, on the other 3 lots that you were talking about before, the 51 versus the 53 lots deal. So the 3 lots that are left over is because of the 50 units going around that that horseshoe. But in phase 2 and phase 3, we're building the road. So the neighbors are not going to be able to, I mean, the road's going to get put in. It's just the square footage of those buildings is going to be left out for that future phase until that secondary access comes online. As far as the grass clippings and everything, it is maintained by an HOA. What's being sold is just the footprint of the house. So the HOA is not going to trash their own stuff. I mean, they got to maintain it.
Dogs, walking their dogs.
Everything that goes with an HOA. So, yeah, so those 3 houses are not going to really be a problem time-wise. Yeah.
I think we just need to take it out because it's in codified code. There's no point in having a finding or if we're covered. But really, we just need to get those 3 lots into code so they're compliant. And then obviously the existing property would be a variance.
On that point, I really don't care what you do. You can put any kind of language you want in it all. The 2 developers to the west of me have both approached me about putting in this east-west road so that they can do their development, because They have a lot fewer complications than I do in development, and they are ahead of me, and they are waiting on me. And so the secondary access is a moot point unless somehow they do not, they already have, Arcadia, you've approved their final plat. I mean, they're waiting on me to put that road in. But I do have concerns about this is a major issue for my development on
those 3 lots? Those 3 lots being shorter? Yes. Well, they're not out of compliance, so that has to go into compliance.
It's code.
It's not a choice, it's not an option, we don't even have the ability to give it. If I understand it, it's in code. You have to have those outside of the.
Well, except for it was approved and applied as subdivision already. Why isn't it grandfathered in?
Because you're changing the subdivision, you're changing the plots, you're changing everything. It has to come up to code.
This is a preliminary and final plat, so this is when we would talk about those things. Those lots, you're still gonna sell them, they're still huge lots.
Yeah, I'm selling them as half-acre lots.
It sounds like the council wants to impose that as a condition. I'll find the section of the code that addresses that, so you can incorporate that as part of the motion. As far as his existing lot, I think you could make the interpretation that it's a non-conforming lot, therefore, presumably it came in before that code requirement was imposed, or we missed it, and so either way, it's a non-conforming lot at this point. But I'll find that code reference for the council.
Councilman Porter?
I would just say too that, I think Kevin mentioned it maybe that, because this is open space along the trail, if they need to reduce an equivalent amount somewhere else, then as long as they're still meeting code, then that's fine. But, I would agree that this is, that corridor there needs to come into compliance with code, and then however that impacts the overall open space calculation, then you can adjust it elsewhere in the development to make up that space if you need to.
You can shift the whole thing down. You wouldn't even have a problem.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Wait, I've got,
oh,
yeah, sorry. I didn't actually get to do my stuff, so. Sorry.
Just
I just have a couple other comments. So just a couple of cleanup items. Make sure when you do your plats, the actual plats, you show, so on one of your plats, you show the driveway length, but not the sidewalk, curb, and gutter, and park strip. And then on the other, you show the sidewalk, park strip, curb, and gutter, but not the driveway lengths. So technically, we can't verify that you have the proper driveway lengths. I'm sure you do. It's not a problem. Just make sure you get those measurements on both.
Okay.
And then also you had a note in there that there's a parcel along the roadway, the existing roadway, that's going to be dedicated to Lehigh City. So make sure you dedicate that to the right city.
Yeah,
that's okay, boilerplate.
I mean, not a big deal, just kind of a
I'd
kind of a
rather hear
funny.
these today than after it's recorded, so.
Yeah. So again, those are just a couple of cleanup items. And then also just a comment on your mailbox location. You're probably going to want to confer with the post office on that. Right now, you've got it close up to the clubhouse where the parking stalls are, and usually what I see is they're away from the parking stalls so that the mail person can drive in, not have to get out of their vehicle really to do all the boxes, versus having to get out, weave their way through the cars. So just confer with the post office, make sure it's in the right spot.
Okay.
That's an easy peasy, not a big deal. And then a question, on the line where it shows, or on the page where it shows the fencing, along 400 East, there's the red fencing line. So, I don't know exactly where it's at. Sorry, it's on page 81 of my packet.
West?
Along 4th West. Sorry, yeah, not 4th. Yeah, I said the wrong thing, didn't I? So my packet is page 81, but it shows the fencing along the road there. And I'm just curious, when the fencing continues along 400 and then it also heads along the backside canal area, why do we have a stub of fence there? Does that make sense?
Why do we have a double fence?
It's a stub, so like literally it continues along the road and then so it's on page 81 of my packet. I don't know what actual page it is. It's the,
US fence.
it's where it's showing all the walls, all the fencing options.
All right.
Dave, can you find that page?
So that would be in the plat, so you'd have to go to the planning folder.
It's in our packet. I know, because I do the whole packet. I don't do parts.
The intent is to not to have stub fences. The
Okay.
intent is to have one continuous one.
It kind of, and I don't know if there's something else there. That's why I was trying to figure out what it was. You see something?
Then under, well, you could go under staff reports. Wait a
Page
minute.
43.
Yep, another-
42 of the, just the one item.
So final plat, so that's what we want, the final plat. And then go under staff reports. And go CC, and then the exhibit right there, the exhibit.
Exhibit A?
Yeah, that's it.
So, you said it was page 40?
42, 43, somewhere around there.
Okay, it's the fencing options when you get there. I don't know where it's
It's-
at, but.
4 from the end, so 35. I'm guessing the staff report is
Oh,
tacked on the
yeah,
front.
yeah, yeah. Before that, maybe?
There we go.
Yeah.
No, it's after.
That's,
Keep going.
no, it's not got
You're
any color on
1,
it.
2, 3, 4 pages down from that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wish our page numbers were always the same, but they're not. That one
There
right
you go.
there. So does that, see on the red line right there, there's the stub that kind of goes out and just ends in the middle of nowhere? So to, yeah, going right there, yeah.
That's to get across the canal.
To get,
Across the canal.
but isn't the canal covered?
It's, I believe, piped underneath there, but the fence is kind of a rail fence, kind of like we've done in other areas.
Okay,
So,
Keep kids out
yeah,
of the
it's
canal.
just for that, the immediate, immediately adjacent to the fence, as you cross that canal.
okay, I guess I'm just confused because my understanding was that it was covered. So it's not completely
Well,
covered?
It is covered, but we typically, even though it's buried, we put up a fence, right along that pedestrian corridor right next to that. If you think of,
Sorry, I'm having hard times.
yeah. So David, if you can go back to the aerial.
So I've got this monitor and all, so
Okay, got it.
If you can go back to the aerial, it'll kind of make a little bit more sense, I think. Just follow the canal, where the canal crosses the road. Nope, down, and zoom right in. So, nope, you're right there. Don't, just go down a little bit more. No, right there. You see how the canal, so that they're actually extending the fence down and just south of that, how
So
the
the
culvert
canal's
goes under.
not going to be covered?
The residual?
Yeah. I thought that it had said someplace in here that it was going to be buried or covered. Is it not? Sorry.
Yes, the canal is going to be covered.
Okay.
I would be very happy for the city to fix that ugly fence that's there right now that doesn't really serve any purpose because kids can go around it and fall in the canal. It doesn't really protect
So
anyone from
So
any. It's a protective iron rod.
Okay, and I get
gate.
that. I just don't see the purpose of having it if it's going to be covered on that side of the road.
Yep, they can.
It will be covered.
You're burying the canal from there down to Crossroads?
Correct, yeah, we will,
Then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, get rid of
Okay.
it.
we can
Thanks.
get rid of that stuff.
Yeah.
I was speaking more towards the current conditions, so I
Oh,
apologize.
no, yeah, not current condition. I'm talking about when the fencing goes in.
So for the reference of that section, it's for that discusses the easements being outside of lots.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be in right-of-way, either a right-of-way or protected open space.
Okay.
That's in 191202.7.
Okay. Thanks. Okay.
Okay. Councilman Wilden.
The condition on the 50 lots, I'd like to see that pulled. I know you don't care, but they can work it out with city code, and I hate it when we trip over ourselves because of a minor thing. So I know you don't care, but let's give the staff flexibility. If for some reason you need an extra lot, we can work it out without having an active, I won't say Congress, an active council. As far as the easement goes, I'm fine if that's the condition ends up being there, giving you the ability to shift things down to keep the same acreage and have that subsequent approval by staff.
Without having to come back.
I don't want to see it again. I mean, I want to see you build it, but I don't want to have the same.
If they shift it down, you can just do it.
Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
You're considering that a minor amendment.
Yes. I think that needs to be a condition in there.
I'll move that we approve the Star Haven preliminary plat, Kevin Evans applicant, 400 West, 1500 North, removing the condition on the 50 lots from the staff findings. Is it condition 4?
Condition 4.
Thank you very much. And making sure that it complies with code 19.12.2.7 on those northern 3 lots within the 6 lot subdivision, and also making sure that the items are cleaned up that were mentioned with the fencing and other items.
Can you add a condition about if they lower it, staff can approve?
If the what?
If they drop everything.
Oh, and if they need to slightly adjust
Open
space to the south, they can do that.
With staff approval.
With staff approval.
So I had added a couple clarifications.
There's a motion on the table.
Wait for that to be seconded.
I'll second it. Now you can talk.
Okay. There's, so I added a couple conditions just about to make double clear about the landscaping along the frontage on Crossroads. If you want to put those in, that's fine. If not, that's fine. But if you do, then this would actually be condition 6 that you'd be eliminating.
But you did say, so I guess because you said 4, because you did say all staff finding and conditions, but you know what, just make an amended motion.
So including the added 4 and 5
Which then 6 is removed.
Means the 6, not the 4, et cetera, et cetera.
Seconded, amended.
I have an amended first from Councilwoman Barch, second from Councilwoman McComber. Any further discussion on the motion?
To clarify, I'm speaking first, huh? To clarify for the minutes, we're going to allow if you need to modify the lots to keep the same acreage and shift things around, that's a staff approval, minor amendment, doesn't need to come to us.
Yeah, that was the motion.
Did we need to do a finding on an existing non-conforming use, or we could?
No, it just is.
It just is.
It just is
Okay.
His existing property.
That's fine.
Perfect. Councilman Porter.
Aye.
Tedesca.
Aye.
Barch.
Aye.
Wilden.
Aye.
Comber.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the staff for helping us work through some really challenging situations.
Thank you. Okay. Beacon Point.
Mayor and Council, this is a request to review and approve the Beacon Point Village Plan 1A. Of course, this is part of Beacon Point, the Beacon Point Community Plan. This is the first village plan to come in. It's 1000 South Redwood Road. You can see on the map there on the right, it is those red lots. There's 120 single-family lots in this first village plan. Traditional neighborhood is the place type, 48 acres, again 120 units, 12 plus acres of open space, and of course the main item in this village plan is the Founders Boulevard. That is a road design that was brought in with the community plan, a unique design, and that is now incorporated as part of that plan. Just a breakdown here of the property itself. Just some various lot sizes for the different breakdown of the lots themselves. 3 different areas are breaking down, different lot sizes up to 15,000 square feet, potentially from 7,000 to 15,000 square feet. And some development standards on the right. You've reviewed this all in the village plan, and I apologize too. I know you think you had 3 different village plans in the last 3 or 4 days. The most current one was sent to you this afternoon. The applicant did highlight and read those things that have been changed over the time. This would just be the breakdown of the different lot sizes going from right to left. It's east to west with the different lot size going smaller, larger. That would then go around the special project site you see there in the yellow. The landscaping would be located here in the green. At this time, what traditionally would be reviewed as city parks, that sort of thing. There are medians and corridors that'll be planned to be landscaped. Now, what we're kind of bringing into this village plan now, what really is different from the community plan is we're getting some more details on the landscape plans. What you see here, just kind of representative, this would be the areas you see in the red dash. These would be city maintained. Outside the red dashed lines would then be maintained by the adjacent property owner. Initially, what we view as a traditional park strip, that park strip right in front of a house, was initially in the community plan to be maintained by the city. This village plan actually specifies that that traditional park strip will now be maintained by the adjacent property owner. The city will still maintain the 3 park strips going down the median of Founders Boulevard and between the boulevard and the slip lanes. The city will maintain those. Just a representation of the landscape plan as you go down Founders Boulevard, and then as you meet up towards where the special project site is. This is the vehicular plan. If you see there on the lower portion of what would be the southeast corner of the special project site, there will be a temporary road there that will then run south. Obviously, the discussion of 50 lots, this is 120 lots. With that number of units, the fire marshal needs a second access. This is something we did for up in Wilders at Mount Saratoga. We just did something Mount Saratoga where they're a temporary all-weather access, 12-foot wide. There will be signage on each side, which will say will be access only by emergency vehicles, and that will be located there.
And they can fence that and break through.
I don't think, we didn't discuss any fencing. Chief is here, but I know we just discussed signs.
It's our pressing because the hills, we did it down at the bottom.
So they kind of did it wrong though in the hills too. So we allowed them, they put a full gate up, which they weren't supposed to do. They were only supposed to put a bollard there. So, because it doesn't allow for pedestrian access the way they've got it.
We're going along with what we did with Mount Saratoga. We were just putting up signage. Again, the cross-section of Founders Boulevard, since this is a unique, one-of-a-kind design here, just to show you that again. The street lighting plan, we met with the applicant yesterday, went over the street lights, went over the fire hydrants. So this is a new diagram compared to the other versions of the village plan you see. We kind of went back and forth on this. If you can see the diagram there coming up Founders Boulevard, you'll see that the red dots are going to be the street lights. To give this look, we kind of took some street lights out, but then we kind of all agreed to the applicant and staff that you kind of want that look of uniform lights going up instead of having kind of sparsely, just with that unique design of the boulevard, we really thought that the lighting would set it off. So we're actually adding more lights in there than are actually required. But I think with the unique nature of this boulevard, that lighting plan works very well with this. Some additional fire hydrants were added as well. The chief didn't want to drag hoses across Founders Boulevard or swing hoses around, so we do have them going down each side of the boulevard. The Planning Commission recommends approval, so your first option would be to approve with the findings and conditions, and of course you always have the option to table or deny as well.
Okay, does the applicant have anything to add?
Thane Smith, Suburban Land Reserve. Not much to add, just thank you and the staff for cooperation. We've been turning around red lines as quickly as we get the comments, so thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, thank you for addressing them, and thanks for staff for sending those out with what changed in the updates. That makes a big difference. Councilman McComber.
So I appreciate the plan. I appreciate the changes. I have a little bit of flexibility where I work from home, and so I saw that, and so I was able to get in there and look at that and appreciate the changes. And I think the changes are all positive. There was nothing that was a negative change. Does that make sense? So like a concern. You solved a lot of concerns with the different versions. I also want to thank staff for making sure that it was very clear what was changed. That saved us a lot of reading time. So I also want to just on the record understand that the reason why we would typically say, well, you're not really ready, let's go ahead and just move it, is because we have some tight timelines with weather and different things that we're trying to accomplish around this unique location. And so it creates urgency. So the Planning Commission also felt some concerns around that too, but we understand that there's a reason. We just don't want to set precedents that every project on all the other acreage around has these last minute urgencies. We get it. We understand. My own real comment is I'm wondering if you had a chance to work with the school district, and is the road going to be the same cross-section all the way to Redwood Road?
We have worked with the school district. It can't be the exact same cross-section because of the way the road is turning and connecting in. That was already designed by the school district. We are enhancing the median, though. We're expanding it, making it a little bit wider, adding some turf in it that would be consistent with the rest of the median that heads up to the special project site. So, and then we're adding some trees and those sorts of things, irrigation, those sorts of things.
So it's some consistency. Because there's a lot of, it's a view corridor in the other direction, potentially.
Both ways.
Yeah, so you know what I'm saying. And then there are trees on the other side of the way. One of the things that I have a street naming concern. I would rather it be Founders Boulevard all the way to Redwood Road.
I think it is on one of the maps already.
Yeah, but it's not on all, and it's not on the schools. The schools they have it as Park because it was never, Founders wasn't in yet, so they have it on theirs as Parkway. So it doesn't make sense to have Parkway cross Redwood just for that little section. Founders, it makes more sense, especially addresses for the potential special project. It would be confusing as you're coming down because on the street light, you don't want to have it say Parkway and then it turns into Founders Boulevard. So
we've already worked with UDOT and they're aware of that change.
Okay, great. And then if you can just, and maybe if staff can answer this question, I don't think you should have to. Is it a 2 left turn already designed to have 2 left turns coming off of now Founders Boulevard under Redwood? Or is it only 1 designed for 1 right now?
It can accommodate 2.
Yeah, it's wide enough for 2.
Is it designed to start with 2? It should just start with 2.
I don't know. There's space for it. That's UDOT's call as they design that.
I don't care if they put the little white, like what they've done on Pony Express. You can see where it's going to go across Redwood. I don't care if they line or whatever. I just want it to be built to be 2 from the get-go.
There is enough pavement there. How they
stripe it, I don't care.
They'll probably stripe it out for now, but there
They'll stripe
will
it
be
as a
enough
single
pavement.
and they'll have a single light, but then they can add the light. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we're not going back and cutting into roads and changing things when we don't have to. And then total side note, I apologize. The company that cut into Grandview, when asphalt, hopefully they're going to be fixing because you literally drop.
Yeah, the cold patch will be replaced.
Yeah, because it's a horrible cold patch. It's literally like, I couldn't believe it. I can't believe you haven't complained yet because it's like, sorry, side note. So I'd rather just have it done right, so it sounds like it is. I appreciate the additional lighting. I think lighting enhances, and we've already added potential for more lighting at the special project, so it's not a lighting issue. People in the area are going to be okay with the additional lighting. And the homes, because they're on the slip lanes, are going to be protected with those trees eventually, and so they're going to have some nice, those who want to have less flooding into their neighborhood. So again, I think this is a great, unique design. I can tell you right now when this goes available, I already have 30 people who've told me to tell them when this lots are going up for sale. So thank you very much.
And if I remember right, you're doing larger trees, 3-inch caliper to start.
Yep. And a potential tree farm for consistency if trees die, which again is in your community plan, which is amazing.
That's great. Okay. Councilman Podeska.
Love the project. Really glad that working with staff and getting the lighting down Founders Boulevard. I think it's going to look fantastic. Just had a couple questions getting into kind of a little bit more of the details of the ADUs. So as it stands right now, the setback measurement is 5 feet to the foundation of the ADU. Would you have any issues with that being to the building instead of foundation? So for instance, if that ADU had, I forget what the term was, but where the building sticks out further than the foundation. Cantilever, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's where I was just kind of wondering if that setback requirement was to the building and not to the foundation, and if that could also be the same for the side setback. So the same rules.
The setbacks generally are, it's free and clear of building.
Okay.
And so that's the requirement for the easement through there, so it wouldn't naturally have any anything built in there.
Okay.
as pertaining to the home. We did go 5.5 feet just in case there was some sort of skirmish over, the stucco being into that 5 feet and the foundation being a little bit further in.
Okay.
So we went 5.5 feet on the main structure. On the back, we don't think there's going to be an issue there. So certainly we could go 5.5 feet if you like.
Because like you have the stipulation of when it goes above 15 feet for every foot, then it's moving back from the rear setback. Could that also be the side setback as well? Or does that cause issues?
I mean, it's going to be a scaling issue. It's going to be hard. The reason you're doing it to the back is because you're potentially having other people in the back of you with accessory dwelling units. So we could make it both ways. To be honest with you, the accessory dwelling unit aspect of it, we're not feeling any pressure at all from builders to put accessory dwelling units in, even though they're allowed. So at this point, we'll comply with whatever you'd like, whatever the city desires to put there. So if you'd like to move it away from the side fence as well as far as you can and still make it fit in there, we do it.
Yeah, the building. And so with that, so when they submit application for an ADU, does that go through your architectural review committee at that point, or?
Yes,
okay.
And actually the entire plan will be reviewed by the architectural review committee, so they'll be looking out for any nuisance structures and how that interacts.
So at that point,
with
you guys would be saying, oh, those are right next to each other, let's.
Yeah, we'd control that at that level, and really, that way it doesn't overly constrain people. We get to use sort of common sense and control it at the architectural review committee level.
And on this particular phase, we aren't going to allow ADUs to come in after the fact. So the ARC views it right up front. If it's not on the original plan, then it can't be added later in this particular phase.
And then last thing on the ADUs is, in there it said may have separate meters. That's where I was wanting to kind of see if that was intentional, or were you planning on always having separate meters with the ADUs?
That's completely up to your requirements as a city. If you require them to have separate meters, then they would have separate meters.
Okay. But I do appreciate the additional off-street parking for the ADUs, because that totally addresses our issues with cluttering up the streets with parking or not having enough.
The way that we have understood the ADUs is that they would be, it's kind of like having an apartment in your backyard. And it's not attached to the main unit. It's kind of it's seen as kind of a commercial venture, if you will, way to make additional money, or allow people who can't afford to build a home to live in a residential area. But so that's why we've made those revisions, is because of that understanding.
Now, this may be for staff, but on the ADUs, can they have like a small business in that ADU instead of residential?
I don't think
Okay.
It'd have to meet the definition of a home occupation, which couldn't be the whole structure. No.
Right. A clarifying question for the applicant. Are you just saying ADUs only in an accessory, no ADUs in the main dwelling?
Generally, if it's part of the main dwelling, it wouldn't be viewed as an accessory dwelling unit. So that's the way we've designed it.
But you'll allow either detached or in the garage, detached garage, or in the main dwelling. Okay.
So just a clarification on the meter, and we experienced the 2 meters. We experienced this in the past. Is if, say, for example, they wanted to basically evict someone, if they're on the same meter, you can't shut them off, and that becomes problematic. Whereas if they're on separate meters, and I'm not suggesting that's going to be a problem here. But, yeah, the land, the homeowner typically, if you are dealing with an eviction, easier if there's a secondary meter, especially if there's non-pay issues and other things.
Well, but if they paid,
yeah,
they paid their rent. That's a rental issue. I'm in favor of a single meter, just me personally. And I have my reasons that I'm not going to say.
If I could just briefly make a comment on the separate meters, just in my experience, when meters, this is whoever the utility's name is in, place where I worked previously, if there was a separate meter and it was in the name of the tenant, and the tenant racked up a high bill and left, we had trouble recovering the money because it was not in the name of the owner. So unless we could have both meters in the name of the owner, I don't know if we could do that.
Okay. Is it okay if I continue?
Yep.
Okay. And so is this the place to discuss the landscaping or the maintenance, I should say?
Sure.
Okay. So as far as like my view on kind of the topic came up about maintaining hedges along, I think it's Founders Boulevard, right? Up and down Founders. So I'm completely in support of doing an SID for those houses along there. We hire a separate landscaping company to maintain that. And it can be at a higher standard of, as far as there's been concerns about trash getting collected on those hedges. And so have that written into the contract with the landscaping company. I know my HOA does that. They come by more frequently to clean that. And yeah, there's going to be slightly higher costs for that. But that way the rest of the city's not subsidizing that. It's maintaining the beauty of the meridians there, and then you also get to install what you like. So I'm in support of.
Great, thank you.
But that's all I have.
Councilman Porter.
All right. Yeah, I'm fine with the changes. Again, they were all, I think, improvements. So, I have a differing opinion on the accessory dwelling unit and the meters. I didn't think when I came tonight that this would be the thing that we were talking so much about, but apparently it is. Just to bring the attention to the rest of the council, we are looking at amending Title 19 to require accessory dwelling units to have separate meters. So we need to change one or the other so that they match. My personal opinion is that in regards to the meters, you just need to follow Title 19. And so if we can, however you need to change the
we could do
plan
that.
so that you comply with Title 19 on that issue.
We'll just reference Title 19 in our document.
Perfect.
Pertaining to that issue.
And then whatever we decide tonight, Title 19 says, then you'll know what it says. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excited to get this going. It's been a long time coming, so we're excited for that. And yes, we're moving fast. I just had a quick question. All the staff concerns that we had in the very first version of the village plan, were they addressed? Because we had engineering concerns, public works concerns, and planning concerns.
Yeah, I think for the most part, the planning concerns have been addressed. I think there's still some minor engineering issues that have to be worked out, but Gordon can speak to that.
That's true. Some minor engineering issues.
Okay. And you're comfortable working that out as it comes into plating?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, we'll work them out with another revision to this plan of their drainage report, some refinements of the drainage report.
Okay. But as long as we pass it, they have to work out those engineering aspects, then you're okay with that? Okay. Fantastic. The concerns on the public works, especially the planting, I'm kind of with Councilmember Podeska. I think that the shrubbery would be beautiful, and technically we're going to own and maintain it, but by everything that we have talked about in our past meetings, we're actually going to create some kind of an SID or SSD or whatever it is to facilitate that, in which case we're not actually maintaining it. So I think that
we're just the management.
Pretty much, right? Yeah. So until an HOA comes forward, and then we'll figure that out from there. So anyway, so just as, long as we get that SID, SSD in place, I'm okay with all of that, and I think it'll be beautiful. Yeah, I'm not sure what the differences between the two exactly, so I don't know.
They're all called improvement, basically, improvement districts now. They all have the same term.
Okay, so whatever the term is, make, yeah.
We'll establish an entity, a separate assessment entity that will will basically maintain this and then also make those assessments on those property owners, whatever the name may be under the code.
Okay.
Yeah, the community plan already has a language that the city can go ahead and make one of those districts.
Right. And then on, let's see, just a cleanup item, if you can actually go through all the village plan pages and actually call it the village plan and not cover sheet, it's a village plan, you go into it, it's community plan each time. So just clean that up. Obviously, the community plan itself that's attached, it is the community plan, but this where it's the village plan, just make sure it always says village plan. So that's just a cleanup, that's easy peasy. What, Mike? Sorry, did you not know that I'm 80 years old? Okay, also on the ADUs, I'm in complete agreement on the setbacks that it needs to be to the structure itself. Again, only because we've had other areas where we have bays that pop out and that cantilever's over, so you end up being, basically next to your property line. It just is, especially in this kind of a situation, it's a little bit more awkward. So I think that if you have that to the structure, it's better. The other thing on the ADUs, and I kind of want to get the rest of the council's read on this, but for me, it was a little confusing in here as to whether there could be a completely standalone ADU in the backyard or if it had to be attached to the garage. So when I think of these kinds of ADUs, you usually have your garage back there and then upstairs you have an apartment above it, right? The only other place that I've seen it the other way is when you're on large parcels and you have attached to your pool house or, things like that, but it's still attached to part of the house, so it truly is an accessory and it's not a standalone unit, a secondary unit. Does that make sense? So if we can just add a word in there just to say that they can't be completely standalone. Okay.
We're happy to comply. In fact, I was thinking about this. I liked Councilman Porter's suggestion of just saying we'll take out ADUs completely except for the reference to Title 19, and then whatever you guys decide, we can comply with that.
Okay.
Well, as far as that goes, we don't have any standards yet in Title 19. We're only doing a definition. So right now we're putting some basic standards in the village plan, which we're going to then come back to and further refine in Title 19.
So we'll have to be
future
careful
village
on
plans,
language.
that's all you have to do is just refer to Title 19.
Okay. Okay.
We don't have enough in Title 19 for you.
So you're okay with being connected to
Yeah.
garage, not
Perfect.
a secondary unit?
Yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm.
And then my other comment is as you go to the different roads, so you've got some great names for roads which correspond. However, going back to road naming, as you're coming down the hill, the first one that goes around the special project, that's fine. The next one down is actually Alpine Drive already. So it'll need to be Alpine Drive.
Okay.
And the one after that is actually, if I remember right, Pond Side. The one under that is fine. If you, whatever you want to name it, it's great. The one below that, the one by the junior high, obviously, is Old Farm. So just make sure that those are consistent, not a big deal there. And those are my main concerns and questions on those, so we're good.
Councilman Wilden.
Don't have much to add other than, yep, don't have much to add. No, I do appreciate that you've spent so much time responding to staff and the planning commission so quickly, and I think this will be a great project, and let's get going, Mayor.
Okay. Yes.
I'd like to see some tractors moving dirt.
Do you have an idea when you'll start to do horizontal?
We are hopeful that with tonight's, assuming that this gets approved this evening, we've talked to Gordon about having a meeting this Thursday morning. We'll submit for preliminary and final plat with full construction drawings. We're ready to go. So we hope that within a couple of weeks we'll have bids back. Maybe 3 weeks, I'm a little bit optimistic, but sometime before the end of March, we hope to have bids back, and by mid to late April, we'll have dirt moving. That's our plan.
Can I ask a clarifying question before we do a motion?
Yes.
Did we come up to a decision as a council on meters shall have separate, shall have
Title
one?
19.
He's just going to address Title 19 and we can argue about it in a half hour.
Okay.
We'll just put may right now, and
It does talk about
according to
Okay.
It's only the definitions, though.
But it talks about separate
It does.
meters. So.
For now, my preference would just leave May.
For him, just leave it as may instead of shall.
Okay. Perfect. I will entertain a motion.
Oh, goodness. Shall I try this? We move that we approve, I move that we approve Beacon Point Village Plan 1A, Village Plan SLR applicant, 1000 South Redwood Road, ordinance 19-10, dated today, including all staff findings and conditions, adding a condition that the AEDUs shall not stand alone, that they need to be either attached to the garage, the detached garage of the house or other structure or whatever it is. Also that all the roads names correspond. And I was thinking that there was one more.
There is the building setback.
Oh, and that the setbacks to the detached in the back, to the rear and the sides, be to the structure and not to the foundation.
But if they have to be attached.
Did I get them all? Maybe?
Chief, did you have something you wanted to add?
I'll wait till your motion.
Okay.
Does that cover all the things that you thought we were going to be talking about?
Yeah, and some more, actually.
I have a first from Councilwoman Barch, second from Councilman Porter. Further discussion?
Yep.
For discussion.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we're talking about the setbacks for ADUs, but if we're requiring them to be attached, what does the setback matter?
No,
It matters.
They could have a garage back
Oh,
there.
garage, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just real quick, this is the only project I'll accept blue hydrants. I first looked at it, thought they were police call boxes, but, so, just a small thing, it was a typo, I just needed addressed, it's in the notes, the hydrants, the maximum spacing is 500 feet, not minimum.
So I will add the chief's wording on that.
Wording change.
They're actually blue or just on the maps?
On the map.
Oh, okay. I was like, you're making blue fire hydrants? I was gonna nix that one.
So
I'll
then-
second.
I have
Can I-
amended first, amended second, and an attorney comment.
So you haven't had the discussion yet, or even really a consensus on the accessory dwelling units. I'm just wondering if it makes sense to make that a special condition that they not be detached, because the council may decide that they are okay with detached ADUs. Because
Personally,
really,
I'd like
We're
to-
only
right
doing
now-
definitions today. And the problem is he's here with an application and he wants to move forward,
Right.
but we're only doing definitions.
So we could
But we need
discuss
to
it more
follow
later.
up with another code amendment that regulates ADUs, since we don't have any.
Right, but he's
standards.
brought his application in already.
Yes. Councilman Wilden, thanks for raising your hand.
I'm just suggesting that you default to
What
Title
if we
19.
put a condition in there that allows them to go and adjust it to align with Title 19 after the fact that can be approved by staff?
Amended
Doesn't need
second.
to come- Well, I haven't made the
Wait,
motion.
we say that again?
Allow them, if they
Allow
want to
staff?
update it later,
They can come into.
to align with Title 19 of whatever we eventually do. They can come back, get staff approved, they don't need to come back to us.
I'm okay with that. So I would add that the ADUs could
Second amended,
align to Title 19 when it comes in, they can,
if they
if
choose.
they choose.
I will re-second.
That's why I'm
Does that
paid.
make any sense?
Is that my fourth?
It's giving you a lot more
And we
flexibility.
have a city manager comment.
Just a clarification, trying to simplify it, that it can be a staff.
Yes.
Yes.
We did, and that's what we said.
Yes. Okay.
Second.
I've
No, you don't have
amended
to.
first, amended second. Any further discussions or comments? Seeing none. Councilman Podeska.
Aye.
Councilman Wilden.
Aye.
Councilwoman Barch.
Aye.
Councilman McComber.
Aye.
Councilman Porter.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
I love it when he jumps. It's hilarious.
Thank you very much. And I do have to compliment staff again, because we met with Jesse, we met with David and Gordon on short notice, and they've been fantastic to work with and solve problems. So thank you very much.
I missed my joke. Our city engineer, Gordon Miner, always brings up my issue.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dang it. Late for something. Totally missed that. I want that.
Jumping right in Title 19, the first one then is definition of an ADU. Obviously, that now that Beacon Point through the community plan initially allows accessory dwelling units, we do not have a definition, so we need to have at least a definition put into Title 19. And this is the definition that we came up with and had some input from Councilmember Barch as well on this. You want to discuss each one individually? Do you want me to go through all of them first?
Does this specifically talk about having me part of another structure?
It does not.
No.
Not specifically.
That's where.
Yeah, it says in a
It can.
example of garage or separate. So here's the problem, is it says a separate building accessory structure. So, yeah, I guess my concern is, if you're on acreage and you've got land,
It doesn't matter because
it's
this
not a
is,
big deal.
but the problem is this is only allowed
Exactly.
where there's not acreage.
Exactly. So for me, it doesn't make sense. And the other thing is, I think about accessory dwelling unit. An accessory dwelling has to be accessory, right? I mean, we talked about this a little bit before, but if it's standalone on its own,
It's a
literally,
second house.
you've made a second house and
You
you've
should be
split it.
plotting 2 lots,
So I would much prefer to see it as actually an accessory unit.
like a basement.
A
or,
basement, add on to a
garage.
house, part of a pool house, part of it, like we're gonna have
Garage.
pool houses here.
Just as long as there's not a standalone
I just don't want
accessory
to- I
dwelling.
don't wanna see a standalone.
What about, because like,
How would you change
I grew up in Orem, and there's a house that had a mother-in-law suite, but it was not connected above ground, it's connected below ground. And so it looked like a
If it's-
separate unit, but is connected to the house.
If it's, well, we've got a house in the city, I think that does that.
Oh,
I
tunnel?
would say if it's actually connected, it's connected.
Okay.
Oh, the pool over there is connected, but it's 2 separate. They bought, they're
Yeah.
2 lots and they paid.
No, I know that, but it doesn't look like it is, but it is, right?
It's connected, but
Yeah.
it was plotted and everything,
Yeah.
it's a separate lot.
Anyway, so I think that we should just make it so that it has to be, it can't be a full separate, complete.
So,
standalone.
like, in this one, they're talking about having it as part in a detached structure, as part of like you're talking the apartment above the garage or something like that. So you're okay with that,
I'm
you
okay
just
with
don't
that.
want it to be only the dwelling
Right, I don't want somebody to think that they can
As a
go in
separate-
and build a full
tiny home
separate tiny home.
in the backyard.
Throw a box on there, it has to actually.
But if they
be
want to
part of-
build a whole tunnel to their house and like
If they
the
want to,
basement,
right?
that would be an
Yeah.
accessory unit, so.
Exactly, it's part of a basement, everything else, it is an accessory
So
unit.
I think it still applies. So
Yeah.
I think the
I
key
think it's
is
okay.
attached.
Like a bat cave, I mean, if they wanted to have one.
So,
it needs to
so,
be-
but,
actually,
or Councilwoman McComber, to your point, like if it's part of the garage, it's not attached.
But it's part,
But
the garage is
the
part of
garage
the
is part of
structure,
the
the
primary
building.
structure. It happens to be a detached garage, but it's still part of the primary structure.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That's what
Part
we're
of the
getting at.
As long as
primary-
that-
Because we require
The garage.
2 enclosed units on a single-family home,
Right, to include parking spots.
parking spots. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're in agreement. Let's go to the next
Does that-
item.
Is that clear as mud?
Yes.
Has to be attached.
I think you get it.
You don't
Has to
want
be
to stand
attached to
alone. It's got to
something.
be attached to a garage or a pool house or something.
Underneath even.
Has to be
Underneath.
attached to some part of the primary structure.
So one thing that I asked to be corrected at the planning commission stage was we have more utilities than just electricity, gas, and culinary water. There's
Secondary
storm
water.
drainage. It should just say
Utilities.
utilities.
Apologize, I put
But we
sewer
don't-
in there, but it's not in this version, so.
But we don't meter
Meter
stormwater.
stormwater, and we don't meter sewer.
And secondary water, they wouldn't
And
necessarily
secondary,
have
there's
for
only
a.
one lot.
Yeah.
They can charge them
Well, then,
extra.
I mean, what about fiber optic? Those are
That's up to them, that's completely
telecommunication
whatever.
This actually
facilities.
brings me back to my argument that it should be just 1 meter. And the reason why, I'll say it here, because I didn't want to say it because it wasn't really appropriate, but I'll say it here, is there needs to be a burden on the landowner, and there should be a discouragement, because if they're metered and they have a whole nother 4 or 5 more people using water, they're going to get billed at the higher rate. And so then they should, because they're creating a higher burden on the community, and it also will then discourage people from having accessory dwelling units.
How is our culinary water, like, how do we set up
So
the amount
it's-
of culinary water?
It's base, there's a base rate.
Right.
And that's done by lot size, that's done
And-
by
and-
house?
By lot
Done
size.
by meter.
Yeah.
And then their
Meter by lot size.
their tier structure is based on the amount of water that was dedicated to the lot.
They'd actually be paying less if they have 1 meter.
So with 2 meters, you'd catch 2 bases, whether the unit's filled or not filled. You know, so there's that, you know, there's that. But I understand your point, and there's logic. It can go either way. It's really up to you as to what policy.
Well, my thing is I did call the council, I can't remember his name. I just called and I said, can you give me one of your council members who's been on a while in Linden? And they had 2 meters, and they're now they're switching back to 1 because renters skip town.
So can we do it where we do 2 meters for culinary, for example, and it's both in the, has to be both in the owner's name?
I guess you can.
I just know, according to ULCT, they talked about this, and they say that the industry best practice is to have 2 meters. That was
Because
what
the industry doesn't care that that the cities get skipped out on a bunch of money.
Well, and, you know, I don't know the answer to this. I'll have to look into it, but I think if you do 2 meters, then technically it would be 2 units and might qualify for the second impact fee associated with that as well.
I did check with the building department on that. As far as the building code goes, separate meters doesn't, in the building realm, does not necessarily dictate 2
Yeah, for
units.
example, you can put a meter on your, like if you've got water out to your barn or out to your garage, you can put a second meter on it, and it doesn't qualify for more impact, so.
Again, it's a policy issue as a council.
I mean, I'm not
There's
sold. I mean,
pros
I
and
could go to 2
cons
meters.
both ways, and so whatever your direction is.
I just would rather not be so.
But this particular item doesn't talk about meters. Can we just fix it?
It does.
It does.
It does.
So one or two, am I missing it?
It says utilities.
Third line from the bottom, utilities, electricity, gas, and culinary water, separate, it talks about having separate of entrance, kitchen, all that stuff.
I have an idea.
So the word
So
separate is above.
David and I
Separate
talked
with all the
about
columns,
this,
all the semicolons.
if I may.
Good run-on sentence.
I have an idea. So we don't like to, I really hate definitions that include regulations. It's just really bad policy.
I would
to do
agree,
that.
especially when they're run-on sentences.
So since the fact that we're going to follow this up with a code amendment, I think that we can save some of these discussions for a later day, and you could just to get it in place and get the place marker and.
I think the biggest thing is about it being attached to the main dwelling unit, done. And then you have all the utilities issues and the setbacks and all that we can deal with.
And I would suggest that David take out some of these regulations and put it in the new section that
Agreed.
is addressing this.
Because just like, I mean, we have a councilman who's doing this as his elected duty, and because separate was at the top, and then it's 50 words later without a period, he missed it.
So.
And then another policy discussion in the future will be the impact fees that Mark mentioned.
So basically, you're
Do you want
talking,
to require
Kevin,
that or not?
if I'm
So do the
understanding.
research on the impact fees.
That's a policy decision.
So basically, what you're talking about is from an ADU must be complete housing unit and down.
strike that
is
out.
stricken from the definition?
I would suggest adopting this with whatever modifications you think right now, and we can have some of these broader policy discussions later when you pass the ADU section.
So we clarify when we pass the ADU section? So we leave it until
Yeah,
then?
anything that's really pressing right now, you should modify that.
Okay.
And then some of these broader policy
Okay,
decisions that
so
you
we
don't
wanna-
have a consensus on, you should address
So in
later.
the first run-on sentence that ends with the parenthesis that says garage or separate building accessory structure, and then may or must be attached to, I don't know how to do it, must be attached to the dwelling, or may not be a standalone unit?
Have them work on
It
it.
must be attached to part of the primary structure.
I think in the past, we've decided not to write code on the fly.
Have them work on that, but they know our desire.
You could table it too, and then we've got this as a place marker that's part of the pending ordinance doctrine.
I like that.
Go and do.
Or just to throw this out, you could just adopt what you want. Now we're going to bring you back some regulations anyway, and we can still work with this
I think the only thing I would like to add
definition.
tonight before we start, so it's under the pending, is just that it can't be a standalone. That's the only thing I think we need added in
Just
tonight.
add that phrase, and if it doesn't work, they can change it later.
Okay? So that's going to be added in just
So
for tonight.
Adding standalone?
That it cannot be a standalone.
Cannot be standalone.
Okay? And then
Are we striking anything out?
we'll just leave it, and then we'll
Okay.
go fix it after.
Okay.
Mayor, council, just so you're aware, we do require a landlord agreement application when somebody, if they have their house and they're renting it out, that the landowner and the renter have to sign. So just on the discussion for multiple meters, we do make them sign an agreement that the owner is responsible for any fee that is left over
Yeah.
if their renter skips out. Just
One of the, I mean,
information.
and I'm going to speak, I mean, Councilman Wilda made a great point, and I think it's, even though we're not dealing with it right now, if you have 2 meters, you're guaranteeing that will always be rented. If it's a single and the house sells,
They may or may not.
they
do
may
it.
or may not.
Interesting.
And so we're guaranteeing that that house will always be a duplex. Because, I'm sorry, if you're going to have the 2 meters, you're paying the, Mark's saying, the 3, the $18, all the base
Because
fees.
you would buy it exclusively to rent out the basement,
Right.
whereas the other one, you have an option that you may or may not use.
And it was a great argument, because we have an illegal basement renting, and the house just sold, and the people moved in, don't have rent, they kicked the renters out, and so everyone's excited. But it's a perfect example, if they had 2 meters.
Party, you should throw them a party.
Yeah, so that's a really strong argument, I think, as well. I guess it's just keeping it, the simplicity of it, but that's
Whichever
something.
way we end up going, I want to be all or none.
Yes,
Does that
I
make
agree.
sense? I don't want to do the may halfway between
Yeah,
whatever
I think for
else.
them right now, we just needed to let them move forward, but
This goes along with obviously the accessory dwelling unit needs to be in the use table. And so because all of those zones are blank, that means they can't be built in those zones. However, we need to have the asterisk there that unless it's part of a community plan or in the planned community zone. Prohibition of creating new residential units. This came about, I received a phone call from a owner of a single family home in the R36 zone. It's a single family lot. However, the R36 zone says you can have duplexes, you can have 3 units. He wanted to put an accessory apartment in his house. Technically, he could. You'd have to meet, your open space, your maze, those other things as well. But in theory, he would have the right to create a second unit in his house. So what this does here, this just says if you have an existing 2, 3, or multifamily building, you can't come back in and add another unit into it.
Yep.
And if it's not platted or you're working on the plat, oh, I want to put more units there, I got the density to do it, but once you're vertical, you're done. Underground installation of electrical and communication facilities. That's the title for the placeholder we have right now for 1913-10. So the rest of this text would actually be red, but it's that much text, it's much easier to read in black. So everything below that would be new text. Basically what we're doing here, we're identifying.
David?
Yes.
This was the pending ordinance that we brought a couple months ago. So nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is the map. So David could probably highlight that, and this is just the requirement.
Everything else is the same, we just not.
Yeah, everything else is the same.
So the map is, we actually had to adjust the map a little bit based on what the first version was. It was actually identifying lines that were not transmission. It was identifying lines that were not distribution. We ran this through engineering, and we've even looked at the street views on Google to see what types of lines were there. So this map now does reflect those lines that would not then have to be buried.
Sorry, that's an emergency.
And of course, the Planning Commission recommendation is approval, and as always, you can continue or deny the request, or parcel it out, or whatever you want.
Had river meander corridor in here in Planning Commission.
Planning Commission took that out. They did not make a recommendation on that. We got to come back with some other issues on that.
So do we need to make sure that we're?
They did not make a recommendation on that, so you don't have a recommendation from them.
Perfect.
On that.
Was there anything else that got denied by them that didn't make its way up?
No. No.
Is that the only thing?
I think it was just river meander.
Okay, I thought there was one more thing, so.
That was just tabled, it wasn't denied.
Okay, because I was gonna say, just from a general standpoint in the future, if this doesn't apply, but if something gets denied by the Planning Commission, I want to make sure it still comes
Oh, yeah,
to us.
yeah, because
I know that's not the case here.
Yeah, that in a sense is still a recommendation to you.
Right.
Yep.
I just wanted to say thank you for fixing the map. I know I was kind of a pain in the butt on making sure it was in the right place, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I have a motion, Mayor.
Perfect. I will entertain your motion.
I move that we approve the code amendments, Title 19, City Initiated Ordinance 19-11, dated today, with all staff findings and conditions, just the findings, I guess. And then also changing the definition of the accessory dwelling unit to stipulate that it cannot be a standalone dwelling unit. It has to be attached to some part of the primary structure.
I'll second.
Okay, first and a second.
Oh, wait.
Oh, any further?
Proper time to question?
Yes.
You said it has to be attached to the main dwelling?
Yeah, it
Part
cannot be a
of,
standalone.
like the garage is apparently part of the main.
Well, you could have a detached garage,
Right.
though.
Right, but you have a
They're saying
detached
that's still
garage,
part
it's
of
still
the-
mandatory for the house, right?
Because we require
Can't be a standalone
two.
unit.
It cannot be a standalone dwelling unit. It has to be attached to something else.
Okay, yeah, I just want a clarification, because if it was a standalone garage attached, then you wouldn't be meeting the setbacks then.
But that
Right,
would
well,
work.
the opinion of the council is that's part of the primary dwelling is the garage.
Because it's mandatory, you have to have that garage.
You have to have a garage as part of the
For the house.
house.
It can't be a solely dedicated
I don't know how
standalone
we-
unit that.
However we word it so that it's not just,
You can have a detached garage.
Right.
yes, and
With
it
an
can be
accessory.
But the
attached to that.
detached
Right.
garage is required.
Right.
If they don't have one attached,
Right.
they have to have the detached one.
Okay.
So however you have to word that, that it's clear.
Can I muddy that?
By all
So,
means.
I just had this thought, are we going to allow them to have an attached garage and have a whole unit with a detached garage?
Sure.
Yeah.
If they have like another, like a,
It would,
That's more off-street parking.
I mean, it's more off-street parking, but it would also really, truly create two housing units.
If it's a garage?
But if they turn it into another garage, because a shop or a garage, they couldn't put a garage door on it.
I'm just, yeah, okay. I don't know, I guess I was just thinking if we wanted.
Because
We
now
can
it's a
address
three,
that when
but
we
now it's
come
a
for
three-car
Title 19
garage for
back.
that. Let's say it's a single.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now they just have a
Okay.
three-car
Okay.
garage for their house.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is the place marker for now,
Yeah,
while
we can
David
address
works on
that
a more
when we bring it
comprehensive
back, though.
ordinance.
Perfect.
There's no amendments, right?
No amendments.
Okay.
Except for my very long, whatever.
Okay. I will do a roll call. Porter?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
McComber?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. We have the engineering standards continued from 2/19/19.
What?
Mayor and council, I'm happy to give you the opportunity to talk about something more interesting than ADUs.
How many minor issues do we have with this?
Don't flatter yourself, Gordon. Engineering standards are not interesting.
Okay. This issue is about the design of pavement on private streets. And the council entertained this before and gave comments that they would like to see design criteria rather than just whatever the developer's engineer comes up with. So I've provided a methodology, the AASHTO 1993 pavement design methodology, and there are 4 parameters. Just today, I received a phone call from our pavement consultant who suggested that we add one more aspect to this, and that is when calculating the structural number, use the following layer coefficients. Asphalt 0.4, untreated base course 0.1, granular borrow 0.08.
You're going to have to read that condition in, man.
So, those are the proposed changes. I think that meets the council's desire to have design criteria and parameters that be given to the developer's engineers rather than what do they come up with.
You met what we wanted, thank you.
Yeah, this is exactly what we wanted, so thank you.
I will entertain a motion.
I will move that we approve the engineering standard technical specifications and drawings manual amendment continued from 2/19/19, including the additional numbers that Gordon read to us.
I'll second that. He just rebrief what he referenced earlier.
I have a first from Councilwoman Barch, second from Councilman McComber. Any further discussion on the motion? Porter?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
McComber?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Gordon.
We have the minutes from February 19/19.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Do we have need for closed session?
We have the legislative
Yes.
updates still that we didn't
We
do.
do have legislative updates. We do have this, a quick little award, but Jeremy, I think, knew we were coming.
You're special.
Yes, the Water University for the National Rural Water Association for his demonstrated knowledge in the complex field of water and waste management.
Wow.
So that's for Jeremy.
Super awesome.
Oops, that breaks easy.
Looks like a bowling ball in the back.
Yeah. So, okay,
That's excellent.
perfect. Okay, Mark, legislative updates.
I'm just going to hit 3 bills real quickly. For the most part, I was asked by Representative Moss for us to make sure that we ratify positions as a council so that when we're talking with him, there's some consensus as far as what we actually are supporting and what we're not supporting relative to various bills. The 3 bills that I wanted to talk briefly about, there's probably a 4th bill as well, which would be something we can come back to. First one is House Bill 441. There is a email that Owen sent earlier that has a sheet that looks something like this to it. It's basically kind of a roadmap to what's going on with the sales tax bill that really is dealing with base expansion. It's very complex. There's a lot of things going on. I'll cut straight to the chase. there is three categories of bills, three categories of tax kind of roadmaps. The state portion, we're not really overly concerned about. They're going to reduce their rate over time. There is, a bunch of boutique taxes, which are like transportation tax, transient room taxes, local option taxes, resort city sales taxes. Again, we're not really focused on that. RAP taxes, we're not really focused on that. But those would follow a haircut schedule beginning October 19, and then again in July of 20, it would reduce back down. Right now, they're projecting the rates at about 83% haircut down to 67. We'll set those aside. The main one that's going to really impact us is the local option, the 1% local option sales tax. Currently, the local option sales tax is something that we impose, and we went and imposed that tax years ago, and it is currently, oh, I apologize. It is currently divided 50% based on point of sale and 50% based on population. And so based on our population, right now we're winning in the distribution formula because we have a good sized population and we don't have a large point of sale population. But over time that will change. And so if you look at other cities that are going to be about the same size we will be at some point, you'll notice that those are large distributors of their sales tax to keep everyone harmless and to balance things out. And so, for example, if you take like a West Valley or, Sandy or something like that, that's about what our population will be at build out. They're currently exporting a lot of their sales tax dollars based on this 50-50 population. The legislature would like to make sales tax or force the League of Cities and Towns to come back and renegotiate the 50-50 distribution. There are some that are arguing that if it went purely based on population, then cities wouldn't be anxiously trying to get commercial into their communities. They would be wanting to get more population in their communities, which I think is a bit of a short-sighted argument because we want services and our residents are demanding that we provide, services and businesses and other things. So the main concept with this bill is they want to expand the base to a lot of things, but then they want to so their initial proposal would lock our sales tax for next year at the 2018 rate. They would give us a little bit of growth adjusted for population, which given the number of building permits and homes that are coming online, we would see a slight increase for population. And then there would be the current proposal is about a 2% CPI. Well, we're currently growing double digit in population, and we're also currently growing double digit in point of sale. And so this really would hurt our sales tax projections and growths. Not sure where this bill's going to land. We'll adjust it as part of our budget process, but be aware that we're trying to factor this in. I've started modeling, kind of on a statewide distribution based on a projected 30% increase to the base. And overall, the strategy that we're going to take with this is it's going to be really thought out. I mean, the league's position is the state, even though we're going to make a projected, let's just call it $200 million extra in sales tax because they broaden the base, the legislature is going to take all that new growth or that new base money and they want to put it in what's being referred to as kind of a lockbox. They want to use that to hold cities harmless, but more importantly, they want to control that so that they force us back to the table so that we have to renegotiate this 50-50 distribution. Ironically, because this 50-50 goes back to the 1980s.
But this is something that the league brought.
No.
This is the governor's tax plan.
This is
no, the 50-50.
Originally.
And now they're hijacking.
They're hijacking our money.
State's hijacking it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So in the 80s, they came up with this 50-50 distribution because the cities basically said it's our sales tax money. However we want to distribute it, what does the state care? Well, now the state wants to force it. Now we are concerned because we don't want $200 million sitting there because next year, they may say, hey, great, we're going to take that money and we're going to reallocate it somewhere else. This whole talk of they want to lower the rate. And they don't want us to get a windfall. There's a lot of concern going on with this. Both Shelley and Stephen, where, you know, I've been in many meetings where we've talked about it. Representative Quinn came and talked to the league last week.
Quite a while.
For a good bit of time. Again, they're not intending to hurt us. They say they don't want to hurt us. However, we personally are of the opinion that us getting held to such low growth rates is going to be very harmful. And then we also feel that this money getting locked up is going to become problematic. We realize there's a lot of issues that are going to have to get addressed, but just be aware that most likely the lockbox concept is getting legs, and we're going to have to, as a League of Cities and Towns, work really hard to try and figure out distribution methodologies and things of that nature. There may be the impetus to force us to change from the 50-50. So, which again, if we go purely off of population, today we win, but in a few short years, we'll probably switch into another category where, you know, we'd be an exporter.
The argument, though, is they're decreasing. They're shutting stores down because of online sales and things. And so point of sale, the 50-50 is protecting better communities because Eagle Mountain, they're never going to get a regional commercial zone, like really, in Eagle Mountain, ever. Because did you guys see how many like stores are closing? 600 stores between JCPenney, Payless Shoe Stores, and there was like 2 others. They're shutting these things down. Like that's a great argument to the state is you can't, it has to be based on population and point of sale.
Well, but the point of sale, so like, for example, if you buy on Amazon, that actually attributes that sale back to
your house.
Our house.
It does now.
Yeah, it does now.
And that's great.
But they're going to take that.
But they're going to take it.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, and there are 2 parts to this too, right? So there's the 50-50 that they're talking about, but there's also the whole general broadening of the base, which generally you think of is good, but you look at some of the things that they're proposing to tax, and it makes absolutely no sense at all. And we have no say. Like, they're going to do it.
From a city perspective, I'm opposed, and from a taxpayer perspective, I am vehemently opposed. I think it's disingenuous at best. And I don't buy in the argument that, I'll say his name, Senator Anderegg says, I'm not going to repeat the words, he says, danged if we do and danged if we don't. It's complete nonsense. Yeah. It's just, their economics saying we're hitting a cliff is complete nonsense.
Yeah, so again, the position is, you know, we think that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I'll ratify anything.
We think that it's going to happen. But at some point, we're going to have to go in and fight for the rate that was adopted by the city, which was this 1% rate, and we're going to have to go in and try and fix that. So that's one bill that I wanted to talk briefly about, and I apologize, it's very complex. The next one is all hit. This one is the secondary water bill from Senator Anderegg. It's Senate Bill 52.
He's just winning all over the place.
The league has taken a neutral position on this bill. Senator Anderegg has worked with a lot of communities. He's put a delayed implementation date, which is very far out there. So we would ratify that decision. We'd ask you to ratify that position. It really, since we already meter secondary water, you know.
It's one of those things where technically it's not going to hurt us.
Right.
But that being said, is it their role?
I think the city should be able to decide on their own.
So one thing that is interesting though is from a water policy standpoint, and we've talked about this at the league, it's hard to argue against conservation, especially since there's shortages, and the long-term shortage and metering, the goal of that is to help our water go farther. So, I mean, from a policy standpoint,
should the state be able to force the city, or should the city should just be able to make good decisions on their own?
They've given us a 20-year implementation period, so I don't know that it's too draconian.
The thing that I have the harder time with is the fact that they're going to somewhat subsidize, and they've got grants out there and everything else, and we had the guts to do it our own and to go out there.
Without grants, Can we get a retro grant?
I've asked.
They laughed.
Yeah.
Let's oppose it.
So,
They want my vote.
the next one is the affordable housing bill. This is also being run by Senator Anderegg. It basically requires cities to choose 3 different items that we're currently already doing. We already, meet 6 or 7 of those items. He has, there's just the fundamental principle of,
Local control.
Local control. And so on that one, we'd be looking for you as a council to give us a position on that. I mean, again, technically, it doesn't harm us because we already meet that. The question is next year if they take it to 6 or 10 or all 20 items.
That's exactly.
Or start tying to
We're
our
now
B&C
giving them
road
permission to
funds.
regulate something that's none of their business, and you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Don't open the door.
So
Again, I'm just reporting the news. I'm not encouraging it.
Give me something to throw at 'em.
Open the door.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
So on that one, again, just look for your position on that. And then the last one is really kind of SB 228, and this is the public improvement districts. This one, it just barely materialized in the last, I'll call it a week and a half or so, or less. I'll call it a week. We received the bill last Wednesday. There was supposed to be a meeting last Thursday. That meeting got canceled. It got postponed. It was in committee at about 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and we met with, those people that are behind it at 11 yesterday. They have made a lot of changes, which, again, philosophically, it's better than it was. It's still not something that I think you're ever going to use.
Lipstick on a pig.
It basically would allow the creation of special service districts for the purposes of issuing tax-backed bonds. And basically then you would create a special improvement district that then has taxing authority. And I understand your philosophical position on taxes, and I've expressed to those developers that are interested in this that I can't ever imagine you as a council giving them taxing authority. There's two parts to the bill. There's this year's, which creates a taxing, a special service district. So imagine if you as a council wanted to create a special service district that's comparable to, say, TSSD. I mean, it's a separate entity, it's its own legal entity. It would have to follow all of the rules of open meetings laws, of public records. It's basically essentially creating a government entity that then administers this tax. Well, the second part of the bill that they've discussed, and again, it's not a bill until it's a bill, but the second phase of this would be next year they would want to create, basically give it more authority so that HOAs, these taxing districts, which would largely be kind of an HOA, would then have the ability to use it to pay for pools, pay for clubhouses, basically have general taxing authority for services. This year, they've been very careful to carve out services.
Allowing HOAs
Right.
to basically raise your property tax.
Property tax. I kind of figured this would be a mini cities, yeah.
Can you imagine having taxes like Ohio? That's what you're going to get into.
So
There wasn't a
again,
mayor at the North County Mayor's breakfast that liked this idea.
I thought that you all would probably be in opposition to that. I will say this, there are some cities that are trying to unravel HOAs, and they see this as a potential tool for them to be able to go in and say, okay, HOA, you 100% of the people in that HOA would have to vote to approve it. If you create that special district, then they would basically be able to tax themselves to improve the infrastructure so that they could get themselves out of being an HOA. Again, not something that we're particularly interested in, but there are some communities that are intrigued with having more tools. And again, where it's the discretion of the council this year to where you could either approve it or not approve it, they seem to think that that's fairly flexible. The fear that I have is it becomes weaponized, and next year you no longer have the ability to choose which subdivisions or which properties you create these on. So again, those are four of the items. There's actually a few hundred bills that the league is tracking, and both Shelley and Stephen have been part of the meetings where we've gone over those. A complete list is on the league's website. But again, on those particular bills, generally I would say if as a council, with
You need from us as far as this ratification?
if you just support league positions, generally speaking, and then, maybe defer to Shelley and Stephen, if there's something that comes up in a meeting or something that they're attending, let them, kind of interpret what your position would be. Again, where we meet every couple weeks, we're taking policy issues every week, And so we'd be asking for your, for probably them to have the discretion to establish what that policy would be.
Okay. Perfect.
Are you comfortable with that direction?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Sorry.
Nope. I will entertain a motion to enter a closed session after a short 5-minute break.
So made.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Hey.